Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission for Wednesday, May 13th. Can we please have a roll call?
Chair Clark,
Here.
Vice Chair McGill,
Here.
Commissioner Baker,
Here.
Commissioner Lesnar Buxton,
Jacob, if you're there, will
Commissioner
you
Laser
turn?
Buxton. Yes, we need
Thank you.
you need to unmute yourself.
Here.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Longstreet,
Here.
Commissioner Martinez Cohen,
Here.
Commissioner Perry.
I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
Good afternoon, Chair Clark. Commissioners, no, we don't.
Okay, thank you. Any written communications that are not pertaining to an agenda item? I believe we're going to address those later.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. We've come to public comment. Ms. Navarez, do you have a slide, I believe, to show? Thank you. Any member of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the commission. On your screen, you can see how to make a public comment. Ms. Navarez, do we have anybody?
For those who wish to speak during public comment, please use the raise your hand functionality in the GoToWebinar control panel. We are currently displaying a graphic that shows you how to do that. When I call on you, please unmute yourself and then speak for a maximum of 2 minutes. For those who wish to speak on an agenda item later in the meeting, please raise your hand when the item is under discussion. Okay, let's see. Chair Clark, we have no hands raised for public comment.
Okay, thank you. There's no public comment at this time. We're going to move to commissioner committee assignment reports, recognizing the fact that not all commissioners were able to attend their regularly scheduled committee meetings due to current social distancing restrictions. I do believe that Commissioner Longstreet was able to attend some of hers. Commissioner Longstreet?
Yes, thank you. Last Friday, I attended the De La Guerra Plaza Visioning Committee, and we came up with a purpose statement, thanks to the hard work by staff. And the purpose statement reads, De La Guerra Plaza celebrates and honors the historic heart of our city and provides the flexibility to serve our community's diverse social, cultural, historic, economic, and environmental vitality. And this will be the guiding premise in the design process ahead of us. So it was a very productive meeting, and that was the only meeting I have attended. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Longstreet. I attended the Street Tree Advisory Committee online meeting in which we discussed all the trees that are on the agenda. We'll be talking about those later, so I need not say more. Is there anybody else who was able to attend a meeting? Okay, I don't see any webcams on, so I'm assuming that everybody else's meetings were canceled last month. Now I'd like to move to commission and staff communications.
Chair Clark and commissioners, we have no communications.
Okay, thank you. With that, we will go to ceremonial items, employee recognition and service award pins.
Chair Clark and commissioners, since the commission hasn't met since February, we have service awards that were announced in the April meeting and a service award in the May meeting. In April, Kristen Bain, who's a tree trimmer 2 in our forestry section in our parks division, achieved 5 years of service with the city. Kristen is an integral part of our forestry crew, has grown tremendously in her time with the city and is part of a crew that responds to everything, as you know, from crazy wind events to day-to-day needs in our street trees and our park trees. And then in May, the city administrator recognized Kevin Strasberg, who's a park project technician in the administration division. Kevin's been with the city for 15 years. So Kevin can probably point to just about one item in every single park and every single recreation facility that he's had a hand in helping improve over the course of the last 15 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations, Kristen. It's always fun seeing you out on trails, on trail work days, and around city working on the trees. And thank you, Kevin, for your work you've done over the last 15 years. We're lucky to have you both. Thanks. Now we have in our packets a summary of council actions. Did anybody have any questions about those? No? Okay. We also have the minutes we've all had a chance to review. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve them?
To approve them.
I will second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Longstreet. There's been a motion. Is there any discussion? Okay, we can take a vote. All in favor? Turn on your webcam and say aye if you're in favor.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so moved. And that brings us to our Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendations. I'd like to welcome Mr. Slack. Welcome, Mr. Slack.
Good afternoon, Chair Clark and Commissioners. It's nice to see everyone. The first item for review is a request to remove 6 street trees from the 200 block of State Street. The applicant is requesting the removal of 3 jacarandas and 3 Mexican fan palms, again from the 200 block of State Street. This request is part of a project for the State Street undercrossing, where they'll be doing a series of sidewalk widening as well as increasing the width of the bike lane in this specific block leading up into the 101 overpass. In 2016, the City Council adopted the Vision Zero policy, where transportation staff prioritizes repairs and improvements where there's a high frequency of pedestrian and cycling accidents, and this is apparently one of the hottest areas in terms of issues related to cycling and pedestrian traffic. So they will be widening the sidewalks. The trees in the existing location would be, if retained, would be left in the middle of the sidewalk, which is problematic and causes some issues just with pedestrian traffic. The committee reviewed the application, the project in full scope, and made a recommendation to approve the removals with the condition that all trees proposed for removal be replanted. It's important to note too that this section of State Street is part of the El Pueblo Viejo district and does have an approved landscape plan, so the condition was that the replacement trees would fall in accordance with the existing approved landscape plan for this 200 block of State Street. There were comments made that if it was possible to retain the Mexican fan palms and transplant them, that the committee would favor that. We've been working in conjunction with public works staff, and that seems like it's going to be a feasible option. So moving forward, if the commission approves, the jacarandas will be removed and replaced, and we'll be evaluating strategies to try to preserve and transplant the existing Mexican fan palms. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Slack? Commissioner Longstreet?
Is there a timeline for this project?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, I'm not sure. I don't have access to the attendee list. I'm not sure if Eric Goodall has called in or not. He's the project engineer for this project. I'm not exactly sure of the timeline of the project.
Then I would just like it to be noted that the trees aren't removed until the project goes into construction. It's a sensitive area. I agree with the improvements, but we saw a long period of time on the 100 block where that project was delayed, the 100 and 200. And so trees shouldn't go until construction begins. And otherwise, I would move that we concur with the recommendation of the Street Tree Advisory Committee for the removal of the jacarandas and the Mexican fan palms in the 200 block of State Street.
And I'll second that.
Okay. Is there any discussion? I know that I would like to make a comment that would the person who made the motion consider adding in the requirement that the jacarandas be replanted, because in the committee recommendation it's not worded as such, and I think the intent of everybody here is that those trees do be replanted instead of planting new trees.
That would be fine. What I understood is it was just to follow along with the landscape plan for El Pueblo Viejo, the replantings.
Right,
So that would be my recommendation, that it follow the El Pueblo Viejo landscape plan. Is that not what you?
No, what I'm trying to say is that the existing fan palms and the jacarandas fit into the El Pueblo, the landscape plan. And some of the staff members had suggested that instead of planting new or smaller trees, they just take the trees that they're moving out of the middle of the sidewalk and use those for the replanting.
Is that feasible, Miss? I understand that the palms were feasible, but are the jacarandas feasible for transplanting?
Chair Clark and Commissioners, transplanting of large broadleaf trees such as jacarandas becomes very difficult, and the removal and preservation of those trees from their existing site would be very difficult. So the intent was to try to transplant the Mexican fan palms, but the jacarandas would be new replacements. It would be very difficult, given the size of those trees, to preserve them, retain them, and then see that transplanting be successful in the long term.
Okay, so just the fan palms. Okay, and I think Commissioner Vice Chair McGill, did you want to say something? I briefly saw your face.
Yeah, actually, the question got addressed. It was the feasibility of transplanting the jacarandas, but I was wondering if it's possible to add to the motion the requirement that the trees not be removed until construction starts.
I think it's possible if the person who.
Yes, I would. Yes, I would want that in there.
In which case I'll second if it hasn't been ready.
I think it's been seconded already, but we can take it to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? So moved. Thank you.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next street tree advisory item for review is the request to remove a London plane tree located at 1020 Chapala Street. Next slide, please.
Next slide.
Excellent. So you can see from the photograph, there's a London plane tree located at 1020 Chapala Street. directly in front of the MTD transit station. The applicant's requesting the removal of this lone London plane tree from 1020 Chapala Street due to complications that have been present for a number of years with pedestrians moving in and out of the buses that park along this specific section of Chapala Street. The committee reviewed the request, listened to some comments from the applicant, given some difficulties that have been present for a number of years, again, with people moving in and out of the buses along this area, and made a motion to support the removal of the existing street tree with the condition that a replacement tree be found somewhere near the project. This is somewhat unique in that this is the lone tree basically in this block along the MTD bus station, and they utilize the curb and sidewalk throughout for loading and unloading of passengers. So the goal was to find a suitable street tree replacement location near the removal of this tree. So staff will be working with the applicant, if the commission approves the recommendation, to find a suitable replacement location for a new street tree to be planted within the vicinity of the proposed removal.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Slack? Okay. I'll make a motion that the commission approve the removal of the tree on the condition the applicant find as a suitable place for a replacement street tree.
I will second that motion.
Okay, is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay. Opposed? So moved.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next street tree advisory item for review is the request to remove a New Zealand Christmas tree from the parkway at 301 Mohawk Road. While not a traditional parkway, this is considered a city street tree. The applicant is requesting the removal of this existing New Zealand Christmas tree due to extensive renovations on the private property of the parcel. They're going to be redeveloping the entire parcel with a new home and are proposing that the new driveway and apron will be within the footprint of where the existing street tree is located. The committee reviewed the application, reviewed the tree, and after review made the recommendation that the commission approve the removal of the existing New Zealand Christmas tree, street tree, with the condition that a new street tree be planted along the parkway of 301 Mohawk Road.
Questions? If there are no questions for Mr. Slack, I'd like to ask if there is anybody here from the public to speak on this issue. No? Okay.
I'm sorry. If anybody would like to speak, please raise your hand, please, on the GoToWebinar control panel. I do not see any raised hands.
Okay, Commissioner Longstreet.
Well, I would make a motion to concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee for the removal of the New Zealand Christmas tree at 301 Mohawk Road, and with the condition there's a replacement tree planted in the parkway.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? So moved.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee item for review is the request for a street tree removal located at 1721 Gillespie Street. The applicant is requesting the removal of a Queensland lacebark from the public right-of-way. The applicant is requesting removal of the tree due to a number of reasons. Listed were multiple sidewalk disruptions and previous repairs, debris-related concerns, potential infrastructure conflicts referencing existing gas and water meters within the parkway, as well as a reference to previous sewer lateral disruption. The committee reviewed the tree, the application, and also heard comments from the applicant regarding the request. After pretty extensive review and conversation regarding the tree, the committee made a motion to deny the request for removal of the street tree at 1721 Gillespie Street.
Are there questions for Mr. Slack at this time? Okay, is there anybody here from the public to speak on, oh, Commissioner Longstreet?
I visited the tree twice. Before we got the applicant's second correspondence and after. And I really do struggle with that being the tree that's in the best condition on the block, it looks like, versus the idea of planting something, you know, that will have a chance to grow up as those other ones are in decline. Can you speak a little bit about the conditions on that block?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, if you drove the full length of Gillespie, there is some varied performance, I think, within that species. This is I don't have the historical information, but it's a very old planting. It's a species that you can find throughout town and is something that's relatively uncommon these days in terms of availability and something that's seen planted as a street tree. I think overall there's, given again the age and some other challenges that the trees have faced over the years, there's pretty good health throughout the street, but there's certainly varied performance.
Okay, yeah, it did seem like it was definitely had the largest diameter trunk in that particular block, and you know the damage is apparent, but I just struggled with this tree. Thank you.
Vice Chair McGill?
Yeah, I struggled with this one too, because of course it's obviously, they're beautiful and it's huge, but the damage is apparent and it is on a walkway that's used by elementary school children, which, you know, is a concern and a consideration for me. I mean, and it's not the designated street tree. Is this something that in today's world you would consider as a street tree, given what it's doing to infrastructure?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, that's a tough question. I think that we would love to try to continue to utilize this species of tree. I think that based on his sort of historical data and observations with the tree in its current state, that it would be suitable in certain situations, but in a specific situation where you have more available rooting volume. So by that, I mean a larger parkway width. You know, if we had something like a median situation or maybe an 8-foot parkway, I think the tree could be really successful. I think on a street like this, moving forward, it's probably something that we would not continue to use, knowing that it's going to get large and that the trunk has a tendency to get extremely large in diameter, which leads to hardscape disruption, as can be evidenced at 1721 Gillespie Street.
Yeah, and I mean, I walk this road many times a week, and it's one of the most densely populated areas, and it gets a lot of foot traffic from all ages, which is, I do think that's cause for concern.
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, just to elaborate a little bit further on the condition of the existing sidewalk, it is currently in the queue for replacement through the Streets Department. So the intent is to repair that section of sidewalk. when that occurs, panels are pulled and a forestry staff goes out and performs an inspection, and usually we will advise on some root pruning or perform some root pruning on behalf of forestry for the streets department to facilitate sidewalk repair. So the condition of the sidewalk is known, and it is in the queue for repair from the streets department. And it's our intent, at least presently, without seeing the roots that are under the sidewalk, that the tree can be reasonably retained through root pruning.
And remind me again when the last time the sidewalk was repaired, because it seems like it's a fairly frequent event.
It is. The records have shown that there was some repair in 2018. I don't have details in regards to the extent of the repair.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Slack, I had a question. I know the Street Tree Advisory Committee was talking about the next time the sidewalk gets repaired, they could do some gradual ramping of that. Does that mean they would bring the sidewalk up over the roots so it would be less likely to be disrupted in the future?
Chair Clark and Commissioners, oftentimes what we'll do is if you have a large enough span where you have enough linear feet, you can gradually ramp the sidewalk up and over things. We have to defer to streets on whether that's achievable, because there are certain slope percentages that have to be achieved. I think it's a 2% slope is all that can be allowed given current like ADA standards. So I think in this situation, we would probably do root pruning, which should probably allow for the sidewalk to be put back in at grade and not even have to do any ramping. But it is sometimes a tactic that's employed to get the sidewalk repaired, but not cause detrimental damage to the street tree.
Okay. I would like to invite anybody here to speak on this tree to raise their hand in the webinar, if they're here.
Chair Clark, I don't see anybody with their hands raised, but oh, here we do. Yes, we do have Mr. Cameron Clark would like to speak. Mr. Clark, once I call your name and tell you to go ahead, please unmute yourself. You will have 2 minutes to speak. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Clark.
Chairman Clark, Commissioners, I think I already said everything I needed to in my letter. I will just expand on that question that was asked a few minutes ago. The sidewalk was completely repaired just a few years ago. We've only been here since 2012. They actually cut out the sidewalk, cut down the roots, and laid it completely flat. And that has to have been within the past 5 years, because we built that fence at the same time. And repaired this. Luckily it coincided with when we were repairing our sewer line, because we did not have to rip up the sidewalk at the time to replace that sewer line. But just in that 4 or 5 years since, it's pushed up the sidewalk 4 inches at the edge and approximately 8 to 9 inches in the middle there. That's about all I'll add to what I've already submitted.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Does anybody else? Does anyone have any more questions for Mr. Slack? Or would they care to make a motion?
I had another comment. I was also, I was taken by the fact that the applicant offered to pay for the removal and the replanting. That doesn't happen too often on our street trees. And is that allowable under our codes?
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, if an applicant is successful through this process for a street tree removal request, the applicant does bear all costs associated with removal and any conditions that may be put on the motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Slack.
I had a question, Mr. Slack. So a concern that I have, and you can tell me if it's valid or not, is that there's very many of the same species along the block. If this commission voted in favor of removing this particular specimen, it seems like all the other trees on the street that were also large and disrupting the sidewalk and dropping seed pods would then, it would be like a setting a precedent. So if we had this one tree come out because the sidewalk is lifted and there's seed pods and there's some damage, does that open us up to establishing a precedent that other residents of the street could all ask for their tree out and then the tree gets denuded of that alley of trees that it currently has?
Chair Clark and commissioners, that would be correct. It would be very difficult if this particular tree was approved for removal to deny further applications for removal of this species on the street with the same conditions. To elaborate just a little further, that was a significant talking point in the committee's decision to make the motion to deny the request. The committee did feel that the approval of this street tree would set a precedent for further potential successful applications moving forward in the future of this species of tree along Gillespie Street.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or comments? I would like to make a motion to uphold the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation to deny the removal of the Queensland Lacebark at 1721 Gillespie Street.
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion? Okay, I'll call a vote. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed?
Here?
No.
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 So just to make sure we have this on record, so there's 2 nays, is that correct? Jacob and Commissioner Longstreet?
And McGill.
Okay, so.
Yes, correct. I was an A.
Okay. So there's 3 and 3. Who am I missing? I didn't hear somebody.
I voted in favor of the Street Tree Committee.
Okay. So myself and Commissioner Perry.
Chair Clark, you have, yes, you have yourself, Commissioner Perry, Commissioner Martinez Cohen, and Commissioner Baker 4.
Okay. So moved. Thank you.
Chair Clark and commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee item for review is the request to remove 5 firewheel trees from the public parkway at 1618 Grand Avenue. The applicant was pretty explicit in his request for removal, stating long-term concerns with his private view corridor as these trees continue to mature. There were really no other substantive reasons for removal listed on the application. The committee reviewed the trees, the application, and after review made a motion to deny the request for the removal of the 5 firewheel trees of 1618 Grand Avenue.
Vice Chair McGill?
Yeah, 2 questions. These are obviously not elderly trees. And my first question is simply, when were they planted? And in determining what trees become street trees or go in a particular block, is viewscape one of the considerations? And then the kind of follow-up to that was there any conversation about reducing by 1 or 2, thinning it out?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, I don't have the planting data in front of me. They're likely several years old, predating the drought declaration, so probably 7, 8 years old at a minimum. It is a pretty slow growing street tree, and oftentimes they're found about 25 to 30 feet in height. There are a few older examples in town where they're slightly taller, but that's probably a fair assessment of like an average mature height. The committee did not get into discussions regarding reducing the population. They were pretty firm on the denial of the request in full.
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, if I could just add, the city's municipal codes don't permit the removal of public trees for view purposes.
Commissioner Longstreet?
I would make a motion if you're ready, because I believe that we do not take trees down for view.
Right, I just want to make sure that there's no one here
Okay.
to speak on this tree from the public.
Chair Clark, I don't see any. If anybody would like to speak, please use the raise your hand option on the control panel. Chair Clark, I do not see any.
Okay, then let's go back to Commissioner Longstreet. I believe she was prepared. Oh, Vice Chair McGill, did you have something to say?
I was going to pounce on the second after Commissioner Longstreet made a motion, so I'll go away.
Okay, well, let's go back to Commissioner Longstreet so she can make her motion, and then we'll get to her.
I would make a motion to deny the removal of the firewheel trees at 1618 Grand Avenue. And I would further state that the city does not remove trees for view purposes.
I will second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
And just for the record, that was Commissioner Lesnar Buxton who said?
No, that was Roger Perry.
Okay.
Chair Clark, I believe Commissioner Perry was voting aye was agreeing, was not in opposing. Is that correct?
Commissioner Perry, was that a late aye or?
That is correct.
Okay, great. Okay, so moved. Back to you, Mr. Slack.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next street tree advisory item for review is the request for the removal of a street tree located at 2526 Oak Crest Drive. The applicant's requesting the removal of the silver dollar gum in front of the home. On the application, several issues were referenced, including sewer lateral issues, general size and scale challenges with the existing tree, as well as some damage to the property block wall that borders the driveway. The committee reviewed the tree, reviewed the application, and heard comments as well from the applicant, and after review made the recommendation to deny the request for the removal of the silver dollar gum at 2526 Oak Crest Drive.
Are there any questions for Mr. Slack? Would anyone care to make a motion? Oh, is there anyone here from the public to speak to this tree?
If anyone would like to speak, please raise your hand now. No raised hands.
Okay. Vice Chair McGill.
I will make a motion to concur with the street tree committee recommendation to deny approval to remove the silver dollar gum.
Second.
Commissioner Martinez-Cohen, did you second?
Yes, I would second.
Great. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? So moved.
Chair Clark.
Yes,
Could you please mention the opportunity to appeal?
yes, I will. Any action of the Parks and Recreation Commission made pursuant to Santa Barbara Municipal Code, tree planting and maintenance, preservation of trees may be appealed to the City Council within 10 days. Mr. Slack?
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next street tree advisory item for review is a request for the removal of an evergreen ash tree located within the front setback of the property at 153 Vista de la Cumbre. It's important to mention that the applicant, prior to knowledge of the front setback or Santa Barbara Municipal Code 15.24 ordinance, had begun removal of the existing tree. We responded to call from the public and asked the applicant to stop. And in the next step in the process, the applicant did submit a request for removal. The applicant on the application listed a couple concerns, primarily with the size and scale, previous branch failures associated with this specific tree, and then just debris issues with collecting on the roof, affecting the gutters. The committee reviewed the application, reviewed the tree, and after review, made a motion to recommend the removal of the existing tree with the condition that 3 trees be planted within the front setback that can achieve a minimum height of 40 feet at maturity. During the review, the committee determined that the commission could use findings both A and C, which are the principles of good forest management, will be best served by the proposed removal, and that the character of the immediate neighborhood with respect to forestation will not be immediately affected by the proposed removal.
Commissioner McGill? I can't hear you.
Oh, that's because I'm muted.
Okay, there you go.
I was just struck by the recommendation for 3 replacement trees, and that seemed like a lot, even recognizing that obviously the process wasn't followed. And I'm just wondering what the rationale was for 3 large replacement trees. By large, I mean the 15-gallon.
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, in terms of size for a 15-gallon tree, it's actually relatively small. But speaking to the recommendation for 3 trees, I think it was to offset the total loss of biomass and canopy that the existing tree was providing to the local neighborhood and to the community as a whole. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Are there any more questions for Mr. Slack? I had just a question. You know, I believe that the applicant acted in good faith. She didn't know that she was violating the municipal code. What kind of education does the public get about street trees and setback trees? I know as a city resident and a homeowner, I didn't know anything about street trees or setback trees before becoming a part of this commission. What education is offered to prevent this happening?
Chair Clark and Commissioners, I think a lot of it is through the just community conversation, you know, neighbors talking to neighbors and friends talking to friends. We currently don't have like a functional, like comprehensive outreach program in terms of this, especially with the setback trees. A huge component of pruning and removal violations is that educational component. And it's a great way to sit down with the property owner, go over the ordinances, you know, define what constitutes a violation, what doesn't, and educate them. And it's been a really effective strategy at disseminating the information throughout the community. And then another component of that is when we do encounter these situations, we try really, really hard to get in contact with whomever it was that was performing the work. The contractors, you know, the more that they're educated and are aware of the city's regulations, you know, they can say, you can call somebody out and they're like, hey, time out, this would be fine. But, you know, the city has these regulations in place, and there's some steps that we have to go through in order to achieve, you know, the removal if that's what's being requested. And the same is true of pruning. So we try to reach out and have that same conversation and educate all the local contractors in town so that they're aware of the regulations pertaining both to street trees and more importantly, I think, to setback trees, because a lot of homeowners aren't aware that there's regulations on the trees located within the front setback of properties.
And then the people who do tree care services for a living, I'm assuming they have a permit when they apply for their permit or business license. Do they get education at that time?
Chair Clark and commissioners, they currently do not. I think that's a great suggestion, and certainly there's things that we can do to shore up the comprehensive knowledge throughout the community that these regulations exist.
Okay, I would like to see something put into place for applicants for a business license or permit to cut trees, maybe that they can take a test or get a certificate to help.
Chair Clark and commissioners, if I could just add, there is information at the planning counter at 630 Garden Street. So as it relates to development of property, that's there. We do rely on the contractor industry. We do trainings every year with contractors regarding what is and isn't allowed. With the idea that they then are able to follow the guidelines and we don't have to move to any enforcement actions. The suggestion that it be part of a business license packet or outreach, certainly we can work with the finance department and City Hall to get that incorporated.
Great, thanks. I thought I saw Commissioner McGill trying to say something and Commissioner Longstreet.
No, I was just going to say that, I mean, in my own case, when we were getting ready to remove a tree, it was, and I hadn't been here that long, it was a complete shock to me that something 30 feet was from the house needed a permit. And it was only because the contractor at the very last second pulled out a tape measure that the conversation even came up. So
great.
So I think really, I just want to concur and reinforce that getting to the contractors and really engaging them in that conversation, I think is really important.
Okay, I agree. Would anyone like to make a motion? Okay. I'll make a motion that, wait, did we already go through, did we have anyone to speak? I can't remember.
Chair Clark, I do not see anybody with their hands raised. If anybody would like to speak, please raise your hand now. I see no hands.
Okay, Commissioner Longstreet.
I would make a motion to concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation at 153 Vista de la Cumbra for the removal of the evergreen ash and replacement with 3 15-gallon trees that will reach a minimum height of 40 feet at maturity.
Commissioner Martinez-Cohen. Can't read lips, but I think you said that you seconded.
Sorry.
Oh, there you are.
That was on mute.
Great. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye. No, not opposed. That was a late aye for in favor of.
All right. So moved. Thank you.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee item for review is the request to remove 4 junipers located within the front setback of the properties at 3445 and 3449 Richland Drive. You may remember that this item came before the Commission back during the February 26, 2020 meeting. The initial recommendation from the Street Tree Advisory Committee at that time was to approve the 4 removals as proposed, with the condition to plant 2 new street trees in the parkway in front of the property at 3445 Richland Drive. During that meeting, the applicant made some comments and expressed an interest and a preference that they replace the trees within the front setback of the property. And during that meeting, the Commission referred it back to the Street Tree Advisory Committee for further review. The applicant on the initial application referenced the crowding between the existing junipers in the building. There was some decline noted throughout one of them, with the anticipation that the decline probably will spread to the 3 remaining junipers. The committee re-reviewed the application, and after the second review, made a motion to support, or a recommendation to support, the removal of the 4 existing junipers, with the condition that a replacement tree that can achieve a minimum height at 25 feet at maturity be planted within the front setback in front of each of the units. So there will be a total of 4 removals and a total of 4 replacements within the front setback if the Commission approves the recommendation as proposed.
Are there any questions for Mr. Slack? Do we have anybody from the public here to speak on this particular agenda item?
Currently see no hands. Please raise your hand if you would like to speak on this item. No hands.
Okay, Commissioner, Vice Chair McGill.
I would like to move that we agree with the Street Tree Committee recommendation to approve the removal of the junipers on the condition that a replacement tree be planted in the back of each of the 4 units.
Commissioner Longstreet.
I second that, and I do think this is a much better solution because that sidewalk is so narrow. So I appreciate keeping the walking space as well as the trees for the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think we got to a good resolution here.
Agreed. Any discussion? All in favor? Oh, Commissioner Lesnar Buxton.
I have to abstain as I live across the street, so are we abstaining?
Okay. So Commissioner Lesnar Buxton's abstaining. Everybody else, all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? So moved.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee item for review is the request for the removal of a coast redwood located within the front setback of the property at 2711 Vernon Road. On the application, the applicant noted a general decline in vigor of the tree, as well as referencing previous limb failures from the existing tree. The committee reviewed the application and reviewed the tree on site, and then after review made a recommendation to deny the request for the removal of the existing coast redwood within the front setback of the property at 2711 Vernon Road, stating that none of the findings within the 15.24.090 fit the circumstances of this request.
Are there any questions for Mr. Slack? And Yes, Commissioner McGill, Vice Chair McGill.
Yeah, and I don't know whether we're going to be hearing from anybody on this or not, but I was curious about the paragraph in the application letter saying that they'd spoken to several arborists and a landscaper who recommended removing it as soon as possible. And I was wondering, did that come up at all in the staff discussion?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, we did review the tree on site pretty thoroughly, and then staff had seen the tree in advance of the meeting. Even though there was reference to safety concerns, we did not observe anything that was of significance in terms of the safety and general health of the redwood. There was reference to those in the application, but there was never a report or any kind of documented detailed information of what those true concerns were. So it was acknowledged and referenced during review, but ultimately they still recommended the denial of the request.
Thank you.
I'll invite anybody to speak on this from the public right now. I believe that we do have some written communications on this particular agenda item.
Chair Clark, yes, we have Ms. Sylvia Acevedo raising her hand. Ms. Acevedo, you may go ahead and speak. You will have 2 minutes to speak. Unmute yourself and speak.
Hi, thank you for considering this. You know, yes, there are safety concerns. The tree is very distressed. It is dropping limbs, and the limbs that it drops are fairly large. In addition, it is uprooting part of the fence. Directly in its path to fall would be at my neighbor's home, where her young child of 5 years old lives and sleeps. The neighbor behind me is very concerned because he can see, because he's higher level, he sees the tree really swaying quite a bit. And in the last wind event that we had, a couple of weeks ago, it lost 2 very large limbs. We're very concerned because one of the limbs in a previous this year, I think it was January or February, in one of those wind events, it fell on a sidewalk, missing a car, but it would have hurt somebody if somebody was on that sidewalk. So just so you know, we had been watering this tree for a long time, put in soaker hoses, put in gray water in our washer. We wanted to have this survive, but we're very concerned for the safety issues.
Thank you. Vice Chair McGill.
Hi, Ms. Acevedo, do you have an arborist report? You referenced that the arborist in your letter. Do you have any documentation?
You know what? We didn't get a written report from this. And then we also had a couple of landscapers, and they're like, this thing has got to go. It's very distressed. You know which way it's going. And I think on our street, the other thing that's interesting is there was a redwood down the street, and everybody just saw it just wither away. And the common story on the street is your tree is that tree in a few years. You know, we're just not getting the kind of fog and water that we need. We love that tree, but really I don't want it to be a safety issue, and I don't want it to harm anyone. I don't want the liability of that. It's a really tough decision, but I really don't want to harm someone.
Any more questions for Ms. Acevedo? Okay, I believe if there are no more questions for her, I believe that Ms. Navarez has some written communications from neighbors.
Yes, Chair Clark. We have one email from a Rachel Fierro. I live at 2715 Vernon Road and am the next door neighbor to the residents in question. While I love the giant redwood, I have watched its steady decline over the last 5 years. I have seen limbs fall from it, and while none have struck my vehicle, they have come close. They could cause serious damage to a vehicle or injury to a person. In addition, I have heard concern from other neighbors, especially when the strong winds blow. The tree does get to swaying and creaking. Neighbors have expressed fear that the tree might come down and land on their homes and family members. For the above named reasons, I ask that you reconsider the homeowner's request for removal of the tree. Thank you for your time. Rachel Fierro, 2715 Vernon Road. And we have one more. This is from James Merrick. Good morning. This email is in regards to the redwood tree at 2711 Vernon Road. I live directly behind the house on Vernon with a direct view of the aforementioned tree. I am concerned about the appearance and overall health of the tree. It appears to have large dead sections, and I am concerned for the safety of my neighborhood and neighbors should it come down in any one of the windstorms we are used to having. I have mentioned it to my neighbor Sylvia, and she asked me to contact you with my concerns. I read the decision and was hoping that some work might be done on the tree to improve its health and remove some dead limbs before they come down and hurt or damage anything. Thank you, James Merrick, 2706 El Prado.
Thank you. Mr. Slack, did any of the people on the Street Tree Advisory Committee observe any signs of ill health on the tree when they were out there? I was with them and I can't remember, it was 2 or 3 months ago.
And Chair Clark and Commissioners, I think comprehensively, as a group, there was noted, subtle decline within the canopy of the tree, which is not uncommon to find in redwoods in Santa Barbara and all of Southern California in 2020. For several years, they have slowly tapered off in vigor. A lot of that is directly related to the drought. There's emergence of new pathogens that do cause some dieback within the canopy as well. So it certainly has some subtle decline. I think the committee during review felt that the tree still had a lot of life left, and the decline was not significant enough to warrant removal at this time.
Thank you. How many more years would you say that this tree, how many years do they live, period, and how old is this particular specimen?
Chair Clark and Commissioners, Ms. Azevedo may have better historical knowledge of the tree. It's probably extremely old and could be referenced probably back to at or near home construction, I would imagine. They can live for hundreds of years in their native environment. This tree is certainly stressed. Again, the drought stress is a consideration, and then likely there's probably a presence of this fungal pathogen that essentially affects the leaf, but over time can cause additional decline within the canopy. I think that it's possible that the vigor could be improved through some things like mulching, and I know that they've referenced some watering, but consistent deep water soakings, and then there's radial trenching that could be employed too that can have a pretty big impact in boosting a tree's vigor, as well as just mulching and trying to create that natural cycle that occurs underneath the tree's drip line. Those are things that may improve the tree's vigor. Those would be recommendations I think you would probably get from most arborists if you called them out to do an assessment and provide recommendations to try to improve the vigor of the tree. It's tough to say, given its current state, how much longer a tree has. It's very tough to estimate. Having experience with redwoods and seeing their decline throughout Southern California, I think it would be safe to say that even if it continued to decline and never improve in vigor, that it would take years before the decline was pronounced enough to warrant removal.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Clark?
Yes.
We have a note from Ms. Acevedo stating that the tree was most likely planted in the 60s.
Okay.
She has also said that they have done, they mulch every 6 months. They do deep water soakings they hired someone to do deep water plunges. They have mulched for 7 years. It has deep soakers and it was watered twice a week, even in the drought.
Thank you. If there are no more questions of Mr. Slack, I'm wondering if anyone would like to make a motion. If no one wants to put it out there, I would make a motion, if other people agree, to deny without prejudice the removal, allowing the applicant to get a written arborist report and return to us with that. I just feel like without evidence that this tree is a serious risk or an imminent decline, it's the hallmark of the neighborhood. I look forward to walking by it whenever I walk that street.
I would second that motion. Yes, there needs to be some either photographic proof of limb failures, definitely an arborist report. I would also say, though, that it was just reviewed by arborists on our street tree advisory committee. That those are professionals, and that sometimes a tree can be in decline but be still able to provide us with all of its wonder for 10 years. So I happily second that motion.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? So moved. And I would like.
Nay.
Nay. Nay. Okay. And just for Ms. Acevedo, any action on the Parks and Recreation Commission maybe appeal to the City Council within 10 days pursuant to provisions section 1.30.050 of the Municipal Code. Vice Chair McGill, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just, it might be worth taking 30 seconds to explain what deny without prejudice means for the applicant.
Okay, so Ms. Acevedo, it means that you can come back to us again with an arborist report, and you don't have to go through the paperwork and the application fee for removal. Is that correct, Mr. Slack? It's like just asking you to return with more evidence without penalizing you and having you pay an application fee again.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, that's correct. And I would also like to extend an offer to Ms. Acevedo I'd be happy to meet with you to look at the tree. We could talk about it in further detail and discuss sort of next steps in terms of getting an arborist report if you'd like to pursue this further.
And we do appreciate you taking the time to speak on your tree. Thank you. Mr. Slack.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee item for review is a request to remove a coast live oak located within the front setback of the property at 910 Vicente Way. On the application, the applicant noted significant issues with rodents, referencing the prominent food source from the oak tree dropping acorns is a major contributor to the rodent-related issues, and had several documented photographs and correspondence pertaining to issues involving the vehicles and rodents chewing the wires. There was also concern, given the tree's placement, of long-term hardscape damage from the curb adjacent to the driveway, and then long-term damage to the concrete driveway as a result of the tree continuing to grow in size and mature. The committee reviewed the application, the tree on site, and then after review made a recommendation to deny the request for the removal of the coast live oak located within the front setback of 910 Vicente Way, referencing that during review, no findings pursuant to 15.24.090 fit the circumstances of this request.
Are there any questions for Mr. Slack? I had a question, Mr. Slack. Is that tree the only habitat on that particular street for rodents to be using as a home base. If that tree was removed, do you think that the rodents would disappear?
Chair Clark and commissioners, I am by no means a rodent expert. I'm sure that there's other habitat in the neighborhood and even on the property. I think all of us who own or live in a home anywhere in town or anywhere in Southern California pretty much know that rodents are pretty active and pretty present. I would be reluctant to say that there would be a dramatic reduction in the rodent population, but again, referencing that I'm not a rodent professional.
Right. Okay. Are there any other commissioners who would like to add? Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Longstreet? Unmute yourself. Unmute.
I realize that we have to wait for public comment. I'm jumping the gun.
Oh, okay. So is there anybody here to speak?
Chair Clark, yes, we have a, pardon me, Mary Subwestre. Ms. Subwestre, you may go ahead and speak. You will have 2 minutes. Unmute yourself and speak.
Okay, thank you very much for taking the time to address this. I appreciate it. So we purchased our home in Hidden Valley in September 2016, which is great. We love it. We love the neighborhood. We love all the large trees and everything else. And we initially had a certified arborist come in and trim the tree, which was in not a great state. Actually, there was a lot of dead wood. It was very lopsided. We had every intention of keeping this tree, and we really like it. It's located about 19 feet from the street in the city setback. Unfortunately, we have realized that the location of the tree just is really not ideal for the tree. It will probably result in having to remove the tree at some point because it is an oak that was just a volunteer oak that had sprouted in this location. It was not intentionally planted, and unfortunately it was let to grow. We have several other oak trees on property, including trees that are oak trees that come from our neighbors. We've planted personally over 100 plants ourselves, trying to be water wise, as well as providing a habitat for pollinators and increasing the environmentally friendly footprint of that neighborhood. We live on a small cul-de-sac with 4 other houses on the street. There are 3 large, beautiful street trees on that. This tree is actually quite close to the canopy. You can't see it in the picture, quite close to the canopy of one of the adjacent trees. We are fully committed to putting a new tree that will have another large canopy. It'll be further back, as you can see in the picture, it will be further back. 100% committed to doing that. And to answer the habitat question, we have tried everything under the sun. I'm a native Californian. I understand rodents as well. However, when we park our cars in the street, we have no issue whatsoever. Our neighbors who park their cars on the street have no issue whatsoever. This tree just drops a tremendous amount of acorns right there. And even if we're out there constantly picking them up, the acorns, we find them in our engines. They're chewed up and ready to go. So anyways, this was not an easy decision.
Ms. Subwestre, your time is up. Your 2 minutes are up.
Thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner Longstreet, do you want to resume where you left off?
No. Yes, and I understand the homeowners' concerns here. I would recommend planting those trees that you've wanted to plant in that area so that when it comes back to us again in a few years, that there would be some canopy there. I think what we're all really concerned about right now is the canopy in our city, and every removal lessens that canopy. So I would concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation at 910 Vincent Way to deny removal of the coast live oak. Thanks.
I'll second that. And for discussion, I would just like to remind that, well, I would encourage the applicant to look at our municipal code for the findings for removal for setback trees, and know that we do not take this lightly, just like you don't take it lightly. But we can't approve the removal of a setback tree if we don't see any findings for removal. Does anyone else have any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? So
No,
moved? No. Opposed?
opposed, sorry.
Vice Chair McGill.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And again, any action on the Parks and Recreation Commission made pursuant to Santa Barbara Municipal Code, Chapter 15.20, et cetera, can be appealed to City Council within 10 days. Thank you.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next street tree advisory item for review is a co-designation for the 0 block of Anacapa Street. The request is coming before you for 2 reasons. One, it's being driven by some redevelopment of property where some new street trees will be planted. And then, as you recall, we've been undertaking an effort to try to create co-designations where the Southern Magnolia and its cultivars are currently designated for use as street trees, given the issues that we're currently experiencing with the pest known as tulip tree scale. So the committee reviewed the 0 block of Anacapa, which does get some coastal pressure and has, a 4-foot parkway, so it's not a huge parkway. After review, the committee made the recommendation to approve Catalina ironwood as an co-designated street tree for the 0 block of Anacapa Street.
Are there any questions for Mr. Slack? Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak on this item? Would anybody like to make a motion? Oh,
No speakers, Chair Clark.
okay. Commissioner
I'll make a
Martinez-Cohen.
motion to concur with the recommendation for the street tree designation.
Of Catalina Ironwood.
Yeah, sorry, of Catalina Cherry. Is that what it's called? Catalina Cherry. That's proposed for the 800 block. Am I looking at the wrong one? Sorry. This is for the 0. Sorry. I'm looking at the wrong one. For the 0 block of Anacapa Street. Yes.
I would second that.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the next street tree advisory item for review is also a master street tree plan designation for the 800 block of Ortega Street. This review and request for designation is also the result of some development that's going to be occurring on the 800 block of Ortega Street, which runs into Milpas and backs up to I think the old Armory property, if I'm not mistaken. I may have just misspoke about the Armory property, but it's a small section of street that currently did not have an existing designation for street tree planting. So the committee reviewed the proposed parkway improvements that will be occurring as a result of a development that's proposed for the 800 block of Ortega Street, and after review made the recommendation to approve the use of cork oak and Catalina cherry as co-designated street trees for the 800 block of Ortega Street.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Is there anybody here? Oh, Commissioner Vice Chair McGill.
No, I was just going to move that we approve the designation of cork oak and Catalina cherry as designated species for the 800 block of Ortega Street.
As long as there's nobody here to speak about this agenda item. Ms. Neverez?
Chair Clark, I do not see any raised hands.
Okay. Commissioner Martinez-Cohen?
Then I'll go ahead and second.
Great. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? So moved. Thank you. Laguna.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the last street tree advisory item for review is also a co-designation for the 300 to 600 blocks of Laguna Street. This request for designation change is also the result of some development proposed within the 300 to 600 blocks of Laguna Street, where
Can I interrupt you and ask people to turn off their mic if they're not currently speaking? Thank you.
So the currently designated street tree for the 300 to 600 block of Laguna Street is carrotwood, which, while successful, does have pretty significant debris related issues and is relatively short-lived for a street tree. And the applicant had requested through a street tree advisory committee member that we review and potentially create a co-designation for these blocks of Laguna Street. The committee reviewed the street in context as well as this existing species profile on the street. And several years ago, there were a handful of Chinese parasol trees that were planted within the 300 to 600 blocks of Laguna Street. And they've been very successful. So the committee made a recommendation to co-designate Chinese parasol tree for use on the 300 to 600 blocks of Laguna Street.
Great. Questions for Mr. Slack? Is there anybody here to speak on this particular agenda item?
Chair Clark, no hands.
Thank you. Would anyone like to make a motion? Commissioner Longstreet?
I would make a motion for co-designation of the Chinese parasol tree and the carrotwood in the 300 to 600 block of Laguna Street.
And I will second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? So moved. Thank you, Mr. Slack. That was great. And now we're going to move on to our director's report.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, good afternoon. Thank you for working through so many tree items. What we'd like to do is give you a bit of a report on what's happened since we last met with you, particularly as it relates to the response to COVID-19. Before we launch into our presentation on the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget. Like the rest of the city, at the beginning of March, we started realizing that the COVID-19 pandemic was going to have significant effects on our community and people in our community. The city's response itself ramped up very soon after the city council's emergency order, and then obviously the governor stepping in and raising the issue to a statewide level with the stay-at-home order. As a result of those early actions in March, our department took a number of steps consecutively over days and a couple of weeks, most clearly closing our facilities and then closing various recreation areas where we felt recreation users would not be in a safe place if they continued to recreate in close proximity to each other. So I can say with a heavy heart, we fenced the skate park because we know that's a very much loved amenity. We closed our tennis courts, pickleball was no longer allowed, the swimming pool, Los Baños closed, Creo Recreation closed. You could go across all of our facilities and services and they all shut down. At the same time, the staff in the department rallied, and a lot of the work was focused on providing those essential services. So food distribution, senior lunches continued. We operated out of our community centers, the West Side and the Franklin, working with nonprofits to do that as well. Our park staff and forestry staff continued to work to the greatest ability, including, as you see in your director's report, responding to a rather massive wind event. And then we also spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to deploy staff in various different capacities, given first and foremost that we had to release 252 hourly staff from our department, not being able to provide after school recreation programs because the schools were closed, not being able to provide a swimming pool for people to recreate in, any number of activities that our department relies extensively and heavily on hourly staff to implement. With that in place, and also the fact that we have a number of staff that may have elderly family members and children who were not in school, a number of our staff ended up working from home, and some of them are still doing that or unable to work that much as a result of having to be a caregiver. Throughout it all, just like with everyone else in the community, our approach was to be sure that every action we took was to enhance not only the safety of our staff, but the safety of people in our community. I can give a big shout out, particularly to our park staff that have put up probably hundreds of signs asking people to physically distance, to be considerate. A key objective through it all is that the city did not want to close its beaches and did not want to close its parks, knowing that those areas were really important outlets, physical outlets, places, emotional relief that people could get after they'd been at home all day or doing distance learning all day. And yet at the same time, saying you can't play in the playground and tennis is not an option, but really trying to make sure that people could do something outside in a public space, knowing how beloved our public spaces are. And not only do that, but do that with no cost. So obviously the economic impact of this pandemic is widespread in the public sector, the private sector, people's personal lives, but going to a park is free. And that's one thing that we can always offer people, whether they can walk to their neighborhood park or walk through a park on their way to their job or whatever it might be. I am happy to report that in the last couple of weeks, we've been able to start up some operations, beginning with the golf course. It was closed for a month. That was pretty tough. We had a lot of golfers that really wanted it reopened, and we worked very hard, both with our county counterparts, our local agencies, the health director, and then our Courseco, our operator, to develop methods by which we could safely open it, activities that people were allowed and not allowed to do, only one person per golf cart, for example, and the ways in which we ensured people's safety while they could play golf. We also have been able to open a tennis court. So municipal tennis opened on April 28th, and we got a great response. One of the things that our staff came up with, which has been very effective and we plan to implement across our programs and services where feasible, is having people sign up using Sign Up Genius, where they have to sign up in advance for an hour's worth of court play before they can show up and play. And that allows us to manage the ability of the numbers of people that enter and also the time that they spend on the courts, and to ensure that the mechanisms we have in place to ensure sanitation, whether in the restroom or hand washing stations, we can abide by that. We plan to roll that out in other areas as well, because it gives us a way to manage people's use of those spaces. We've also put a lot more staff on the beach earlier than we usually do. And we did that as you all experienced the wonderful warm weather that just made everybody want to go to the beach. So we brought back some of our aquatics hourly staff. Starting on a weekend, we opened our towers. We have beach patrols, working with the waterfront department and then also the fire department, really encouraging people throughout those warm weekends to physical distance and be cognizant of what they need to do to ensure everybody's safety. So we have been able to do those things. We're working very hard to restore the volleyball nets to East Beach, because we have a lot of folks that are waiting for that to happen. We're also looking for opportunities as soon as possible to open Los Baños pool so that we can promote some lap swimming following, again, safe guidelines. And then similarly, finding a way to open the skate park for controlled access, where we can have skaters sign up in advance and we can manage the number of skaters that are actually in the park at any one time. So we're looking for any opportunity we can to get approval to open facilities, but to do that in a safe manner. I will say that it's been a huge strain for some of the staff that remain at work with the loss of the hourly staff, and then some of our other staff are unable to report to work. At the same time, everybody has rallied. They've taken on new challenges. They've been super creative, and we really feel like, you know, we all are in this together, and we're looking for ways to really do what we can do under the circumstances. You will hear in your budget presentation that, as with other businesses and organizations in the community, we've sustained a significant revenue loss as a result of this. And to the extent possible with this fiscal year, we found ways to reduce expenses to try to minimize the impact to the city's general fund. We are anticipating that we'll continue to have to be nimble and creative. I'll get into more of that as we talk about our budget presentation. And then I would also just like to speak about the wind event, which was really quite tremendous, which happened on April 23rd. And the devastation that it caused in a number of different areas. We had reported wind speeds of 78 miles per hour at the peak of the incident, and we had forestry crews showing up soon after midnight in the early mornings to begin addressing these trees. If you have been anywhere near Chase Pond Park lately, you will notice we lost two of our iconic eucalyptus trees, one of them right by the main stage and the other one adjacent to the restroom and the playground. Luckily, the park itself did not sustain any major damage. And so both of those trees have been cleaned up. I was through there yesterday morning, and it's quite amazing the amount of work that was done to achieve that cleanup. In total, we lost 18 city trees. When you look at the hours that were spent, certainly by the forestry staff, this is in addition to trying to keep everything going. Probably well around 450 hours, and we also relied heavily on contractors to respond as well as we could. So that kind of wraps up what we've been doing. We've all, as community members and individuals, been responding to this crisis, so we're sensitive to that. And I do also want to take the opportunity to thank the Commission for your consideration and patience as we've tried to get your meetings back up and running, and we're very pleased to see you all again, even though we're all in different places. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. I would like to express, without breaking on the tears, my gratitude for what your department's done during this time and keeping our public spaces open. I think our community would be so much worse off right now if we didn't have those places to go. Commissioner Longstreet.
I would just like to give a big thank you to all the staff. We don't think what it's like to have possibly almost half your workforce taken away from you at any given time, and to maintain what needs to be maintained for the community. And I think this is going to be a rough year going forward, and I hope you will rely on the Commission to help with some of the cuts and the things that are going to come in the future, and a lot of that decision making, so that we go forward to the public in a united force, because this is unprecedented. And thank you for keeping everything going the way it is going, and I think we're going to learn a lot.
Vice Chair McGill.
Well, I'm going to be violently agreeing with everything that's just been said, but and particularly as a commission, obviously we're not doing the heavy lifting. You guys are, and you're doing an awesome job. But we can be advocates for everything that needs to happen and for what the department's doing. So, I mean, I personally would really welcome the opportunity to engage. And take the kind of ownership for the decisions that need to be made so that we can represent you to the best of our ability.
Thank you. Okay. So looks like it's time to start talking budget. Ms. Zachary, there being no old business as far as more.
Chair, Clerk, and Commissioners, I'm just getting our PowerPoint up. Hopefully you can see that on your screen.
Not quite yet.
No, I just see the two of you.
Okay, give me 2 seconds. I have to change the screen. Okay, here we go. How's that? Does that work?
It's pretty good.
Can you see the PowerPoint on your screen?
I can see the PowerPoint.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, we're all learning. And actually, this gives me an opportunity to thank Rose Navarez because she is the leader in this effort to put our meetings online. And she's worked closely with all of you. So thank you for doing that. She's worked closely with me and the staff here, the staff at City Hall and in our IT, and really put a ton of effort into making today's meeting a go. So I want to publicly recognize Rose for her work.
I would like to too. She's gone above and beyond making this run flawlessly. Thank you, Rose. I know she's having so much fun with it.
Absolutely agree.
So, Chair, Clerk, and Commissioners, I will begin the presentation and go through some slides. We also have Nicole Parmalee, who's our business manager, who will be speaking to the slides, and then Rich Hanna and Matt Parker, our Recreation and Parks Manager, collectively are available to answer questions. They are available by webcam in another room, so you will see them soon. And I will also be speaking to the Creeks division, the Creeks Fund slides. Cameron Benson is not currently in the office. So to begin, we are going to present what we thought was going to be our fiscal year 2021 budget, because that's essentially what has been published. We're also going to talk about how we see that potentially changing as a result of the COVID crisis. So you'll get a two-part series, and the discussion with the commission today will get carried to the city council at the city council meeting next Tuesday. And ultimately, a number of decisions will be made by the city council regarding how to address the revenue shortfalls that the city is already experiencing and will continue to experience. The department itself is highly reliant on its own revenues. And so in addition to what's happening citywide, we're experiencing significant revenue loss as well. So with that said, we always like to start with our mission because that's why we're all here. We want to provide clean and safe parks, beaches, and recreation facilities. We want to enhance Santa Barbara's beauty. We promote stewardship of our resources, and we provide quality recreation and cultural experiences, community services to improve the life of Santa Barbara residents. As I mentioned when I began, we're going to talk a series. Nicole Parmalee and I will share the presentation. We'll do the general fund, miscellaneous fund, capital program, then we'll switch actually to the Creeks Fund and the Gulf Fund, and interweaved through this presentation will be the impacts from COVID-19. The department organization hasn't changed. It is essentially the same structure that you've seen before. We have 5 manager positions, an assistant director, and a director. 2 of those positions are vacant, and they will likely continue to be vacant for some time. We have 19 programs and 4 funds. We have just under 92 full-time equivalent staff, and we've budgeted for 140,000 hourly hours. So that gives you a sense of, that's another 70 people that make up Parks and Recreation, of which we're not 100% sure how many of those will be able to hire back this year in fiscal year 21. When we look at our fiscal year 21 budget, it's very similar to what you've seen before. Our expenditures are just under 27 million. Of those, 18 million of them are the general fund, 4.7 Creeks Fund, and the Gulf Fund is $2.8 million. The Miscellaneous Grants Fund is a small component of what we do. When we look at our revenues, this gives you a sense of that 26 million. Half of the revenue, half of the department's budget is based on revenue. The general fund makes up 45% of that with 6.1 million, Gulf Fund 2.9, and the Creeks Fund 4.3. Gulf Fund is an enterprise fund, so all the revenue comes from the operations of the golf course and stay within the golf course. The Creeks Fund revenue comes from Measure B, the TOT tax, so knowing what's happened recently, that's one of the issues that we do have looking forward. So just to begin with the general fund, and I'm going to turn it over to, actually, I think I have 2 more slides. I do. General fund. Santa Barbara is an amazing city in terms of its parks, and it's the way parks are assets to our community. Not only do we provide open space and neighborhood play spaces, we have places for community gatherings and cultural celebrations. We have areas where we have wonderful natural resources and we're protecting and enhancing the habitats. We're very much engaged and focused on youth physical and social development, and we support family, adult, senior wellness, and fitness programs throughout the community. Our goal is always to enhance the vitality and the livability of Santa Barbara. When you look at what we have as a community, we have just over 1,800 acres of parkland. We have 61 parks and sports facilities. This is over an 18.2 square mile area. We have 16 community buildings, 6 miles of beach, swimming pools, playgrounds, tennis courts, pickleball courts, volleyball courts, and thousands of park and street and open space trees. We have a vibrant recreation division, and we provide a variety of recreation programs and services, both in the summertime and throughout the year for youth, throughout the year for adults and seniors. We promote youth cultural arts and mentorship programs. And as I said earlier, we also provide venues for private events and community special events. And we provide social services to low-income families in certain areas of our city. We rely heavily not only on our hourly staff for what we do, but our community partnerships. And we have many community partnerships that ensure that a number of things, services that we provide, can move forward in the community. So now I'm going to actually turn the presentation over to Ms. Parmalee, and she will walk you through the numbers, and then we'll come back to our response to COVID.
Thank you, Ms. Zachary. Can everyone hear me okay, I'm assuming, and see us? Okay, looks good. Good evening, Chair Clark and Commissioners. Nicole Parmalee, Business Manager for the Parks and Recreation Department. Okay, so to start off, when we look at general fund alone, the recommended budget is $18.6 million for fiscal year 2021. Of that, $6.1 million, or 1/3, comes in from revenue from programs, services, and leases that the department administers. Next slide, please. Here we have our general fund personnel by division. So administration has just over 10% with 8.35 FTEs. Recreation has 26.4%, or excuse me, 26.4 FTEs, and parks with 47.4, for a total of 82.15 within the general fund. The remainder of staff within our department are allocated primarily to the Creeks Fund, and also with a portion of a few positions allocated to the Gulf Fund, for a total of 91.48 proposed FTEs across the department. Next slide, please. Looking at our general fund expenses by category, it's overall a 5% increase from the current fiscal year budget. going from around 17.8 million to 18.6 million. And when we look at some of the different components for that, salaries and benefits include standard and negotiated increases, as well as some upstaffing in hourly positions that relate to the Cabrillo Pavilion reopening. Allocated costs are determined outside of the department by finance and other city departments, and this category includes things like vehicle maintenance and replacement, liability insurance, custodial, and utilities allocated costs. And then the 9.9% increase in supplies and services includes a $61,000 increase in the Parks Division due to an agreement with Public Works for park staff to take on additional responsibility for islands and medians maintenance. And this comes with a corresponding revenue increase that we'll see in a later slide as well. And then some other increases include irrigation and other water costs across the department, as well as facilities maintenance and non-contractual services that are associated with the pavilion reopening, and increases in certain recreation programming, which also comes with corresponding revenue. And then in the special projects line, you'll see a decrease of 8.2%, which relates to one-time funding of park safety improvements that was included in the current fiscal year FY20 budget. And similarly, the decrease in equipment relates to one-time funding in FY20 for a vehicle purchase for the new park ranger that was added to the department staff this fiscal year. Next slide, please. So when we look at our expenses by division, you'll see a larger increase in administration, which relates to somewhat to anticipated special projects funding related to the pavilion. In parks, you'll see, again, the majority of the increase relating to the increased contract work with Public Works, which again, there's corresponding revenue increase. And then in recreation, increases are related to the pavilion reopening and non-contractual increases for programming, for which there's also corresponding revenue. Next slide, please. And then if we, take a look at specifically a few things to point out about the different divisions, the Parks Division has a proposed budget of $8.4 million. And you can see on this slide how those expenses are broken out by functional area. The Parks Division provides a variety of different services, including maintaining street trees, city medians and parkways, providing park ranger security services for the school district, and maintaining Sheffield open space and waterfront parking landscape under contract with the waterfront and Public Works departments. So when we look at just the amount of funding that is spent in operations and maintenance of city parks, that amount is the largest piece of the pie right there, $6.5 million or 78% of the division budget. Next slide, please. Looking at the Recreation Division, the proposed expense budget is similar at $8.5 million, and this pie chart gives you a sense of how that breaks out and where the funds are expended in our different programs. Next slide, please. Looking at revenue, the proposed revenue budget is $6.2 million, and this pie chart provides a sense of where that funding actually comes in. So when it comes to recreation, we have revenues from facility rentals, restaurant concessions, which is the budgeted revenue for the restaurant at the pavilion, as well as the arts and crafts show, leases, and programming fees. And then the 25% intracity service accounts for work that we do with funds from other departments or transfers in, such as utility users tax for street trees. Next slide, please. And then similarly, revenue by division, as this table shows, the vast majority of our revenue does come in through the Recreation Division, through programs and services, which accounts for nearly 3/4 of all revenue across the department. And budgeted increases in recreation include increases related to, again, the pavilion for event rentals, restaurant concessions, admissions, and waterfront concessions, as well as increases in recreation programming, particularly in youth activities, active adults in classes, sports, and pickleball programs. And then in parks, you'll see the corresponding revenue increase that I mentioned earlier relating to the contract for the additional islands and medians maintenance. Next slide, please. So this slide shows Parks Division revenue by program, and you can see that the majority is received in forestry via the user's utility tax reimbursement for street trees, followed next by waterfront reimbursement, which comes into the grounds and facilities maintenance program for a total of $1.5 million. Next slide, please. And then looking at the Recreation Division revenue by program, you can see that out of the division total of $4.5 million, facilities and special events, aquatics, youth activities, community services, and active adults are all between $500,000 and $1.3 million, with smaller amounts of revenues coming in through sports and tennis, although these programs are expanding. Next slide, please. Okay, so fees and charges, this is where the revenue comes in. We have about 190 recreation program and facility fee areas across the department, which are largely in recreation. We do have one in parks, which I think was mentioned actually earlier, which has to do with street tree removals. For the FY21 proposed budget, we have 11 new fees, and generally those are around new programs and activities that we're offering. We're also proposing to discontinue 7 and make moderate changes to 42. And every year, staff do a thorough assessment of various factors when it comes to putting forward any proposed fee changes. So we look at cost recovery, maximizing participation while also remaining competitive with other local service providers, providing quality programs and services at rates that are also affordable to the community, and structuring our fees effectively to reach our target markets while remaining flexible in the fee structure. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of our fee changes, and most of these are related to our cost of doing business in areas that we continue to see costs rise, including minimum wage and water. Additionally, tennis group lessons are proposed to increase by about $11 to ensure that we can recruit quality instructors to teach, and this is also in line with other recreation agencies and well below private clubs. And then additionally, our pickleball permits, the increase looks fairly high at 25%, but this is actually only a $2 increase, which will support court resurfacing and maintenance for increased use, as the number of pickleball courts has quadrupled in recent years due to increased demand. And then I mentioned earlier the street tree removal application fee in parks, and we're proposing to increase that from $50 to $75, which is actually the first increase since the fee was established 10 years ago. And this new amount is more reflective and appropriate of the associated staff time that's spent in processing these applications. And then finally, our nonprofit lease rates reflect the standard annual increase of 3%. To offset utility and allocated cost increases associated with the lease space. Next slide, please. And then switching gears to our performance measures. We have many performance measures for the department, and these are reviewed annually to make sure that they're still in line with department objectives. And then we, obviously make changes where needed, either to capture accounting changes, a particular program moves from one area of the budget to another, or looking at historical performance or new program trends. And overall in FY21, we have minimal proposed changes. Some examples of new project objectives that were added for the upcoming year include tracking and increasing web traffic to the Cabrillo Pavilion microsite, as well as improving customer service by implementing additional features of the Perfect Mind recreation management system, and working with Perfect Mind, the programming team, to tailor those features to the department's specific needs, whether it be a customized report or a new functionality within the registration module. And then it's of course worth mentioning that along with many other things in our budget, in light of the recent economic impacts and the programming restrictions that the department is navigating due to the pandemic, we will certainly need to revise many of the annual targets, and in some cases even forego certain performance measures that are associated with programs and services that may no longer be feasible in the upcoming year. Next slide, please. And very briefly with Miscellaneous Grants Fund, the programs that you see here are some of those that are included in the fiscal year 21 proposed budget and have associated revenues also in miscellaneous grants. However, some of these programs will be impacted by the reductions in the general fund where they may be partially funded and where programs may not be able to continue in FY21 due to the COVID-19 impacts. And on that note, I will turn it back over to Ms. Zachary to discuss in more detail the impacts the department is facing due to COVID-19.
Chair Clark and commissioners, I don't know if you want to ask questions before we continue on.
I would just like to make a request. Can you please email the PowerPoint to us? The narrative of the budget this year was really hard to get through. And these charts, along with that narrative, make it make sense. So I need to see the PowerPoint and be able to really sit with it a while. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, yes, certainly we will do that. So what we'd like to do now is hopefully get this to advance. Let's see. There we go. As I mentioned in the director's report, and as you well know, community-wide, the city's experienced a number of revenue losses in the last 2 months, and we're not only addressing those, but projecting out what could happen, certainly in the first quarter of fiscal year 21, and then carrying throughout the year, and anticipate that that things will be different. So we've done a lot of work at the staff level under the direction of Paul Casey, the city administrator, to come up with proposed changes to what we would do, certainly in the near term, and then also how we're approaching as the year unfolds, how we will try to be responsive, not only to continue providing programs and services to the community, but finding ways to minimize the losses that we're incurring and minimize the expenses that perhaps we can no longer afford to have. And what this does mean is that there are areas of the services we provide that the city largely subsidizes, for which we no longer have the resources to do that. So when we just look at fiscal year 20, I mentioned we had significant revenue losses due to canceled programs, services, and facility closures. Right now, we're projecting over $1 million in lost revenue for the last quarter of this fiscal year. We also needed to release 252, which was more than half of the hourly employees citywide that were released. And then we have 12 permanent staff vacancies. So when you look at what we have as a general fund portion of this department, we have 80 permanent staff, and right now we have 15% of those staff vacancies across 3 divisions. We took a number of steps to reduce non-essential operating expenditures and then postponing capital investments. We anticipate, at least at third quarter, that as a result of the extensive staff vacancies that we've experienced, not only this year, but in prior years, we will be returning money to the general fund. So Parks and Recreation has saved funds. We've lost revenue, but we anticipate that there will be anywhere between $400,000 and $500,000 that will get returned to the general fund and help offset the citywide losses that are currently occurring. So I mentioned a bit what's going on, so I won't belabor this point, but I do want to reiterate that we are actively looking at ways to reopen other facilities. We've developed extensive safety plans and sanitation plans that we realize would have to be approved. Our recreation staff, particularly our aquatic staff, have been coordinating closely, following what our colleagues are doing throughout the state, developing standards in order to advocate for finding ways to bring recreation back that's safe. We do anticipate that for some time in the future, indoor facility and park areas for large gatherings will be restricted. And even though everybody looks to summer as a place to go to camp, we're still waiting for guidance on what type of recreation programming we could provide and what we actually think we can actually do as a department, given limited staff resources and limited facilities. And so we'll be revising any programs and services that we think we can provide. So we're actively working on those. We really do want to be able to share with our customers within the next couple of weeks what we think we can actually do during the summer months. And this, of course, takes into consideration, we're not quite sure what the school district's doing yet. So there's a lot that's up in the air community-wide, but we're striving to figure out how to respond and be nimble and adapt to them where we can do it with our resources and where we can do it where financially would not further make it further difficult for us to operate in the new year. So what we've been asked to do from the city administrator as a first look is identify 5% reductions in our operating budget. So this is for the general fund. So you saw earlier in the presentation, it's about $18 million. 5% of that would get us to just over 900,000. I would point out that of those 18 million, 6 million is revenue. So when you're looking at cutting expenses, you're really looking at cutting expenses on the non-revenue stuff. Or if revenue is declining, we have to also cut expenses associated with the revenue that we needed in order to have that expense. So it can be a bit of a double or a triple whammy, depending on how things play out. So to begin, our recommendations are that we would hold 4 of our positions vacant through the entire fiscal year, and that we would delay 8 positions for 6 months. Filling those positions. That would give us a fairly large chunk of salary and benefit savings. We are also proposing that we would continue hourly staff reductions in all 3 divisions, and those reductions really have to do with staff that work on the weekend in parks, for a total of just about 2.4 full-time equivalent staff, and then staff in our recreation programs, which actually be the equivalent of 8.5 full-time equivalent staff. Some of these reductions are associated, particularly in recreation, with programs that we're not sure we can provide, given the restrictions around COVID. So we wouldn't be able to do them anyway, and that's one place where we know we won't incur that expense. We've also identified reductions in supplies and services and allocated costs by returning computers to the IT department because we don't need them right now. When we look at what that really means, because we rely on hourly staff, we also rely on our permanent staff. Having downstaffed in the Franklin Neighborhood Center, we would reduce those reception hours. That's an area of our community where we do provide service. People walk in and they have questions and we can direct them places. The Westside Community Center, right now we're looking at 2 vacancies, one that would be vacant for the entire year, another one that we would try to fill by the beginning of January. So we're down to one permanent staff person at that facility and no hourly staff at that facility. So we would change hours to that facility by appointment only. We do have a number of lessees in the building and on the property. We always work with them and we would continue to work with them. The Davis Center, we're looking at we wouldn't staff it at all. We're not anticipating in the near term being able to provide senior programs, but when we do and are able to, that we would relocate those to the Westside Center. And in part, the Westside Center could be more appropriate because we have a large room there. So if we have to distance people in programs, it's more feasible to do that in that location than it is at the Davis Center. Career recreation in the Cabrillo Pavilion, also looking at reduced operating and reception hours as a result of a lack of staff, both permanent and hourly staff. And then similarly, the administration building at 620 Laguna, as a result of losing hourly staff at that building, and then needing to repurpose some of our administrative staff across other facilities, we would be open by appointment only as well in this location. This is a big step for us as a department, but I would say we have successfully encouraged more people to do business with us online. We always have somebody answering the phone. In fact, I had someone in City Hall saying there's always someone at Parks and Recreation answering the phone. They might be sitting at Career Recreation, or at 402 Ortega, or at 620. They could be anywhere, but there's always somebody answering the phone so people can get a live body and we can direct them to have those services. What else does it mean with 5% reductions? We very difficultly looked at our subsidized recreation programs like Summer Fun, and that's a program that we really don't know how we would provide under the restrictions for COVID-19. And then gathering in open parks, concerts are not something that is going to happen this summer likely. Just like all of the other festivals we're so accustomed to having, whether it's Earth Day or Solstice or other activities, the gathering of large numbers of people is not going to be acceptable. So we won't be doing that program this summer. That's only to say it's just this summer. It's our goal, obviously, to bring things back as soon as we can. As we look to other summer programs and we looked at fall youth programs, a lot of it really hinges on the ability to have groups of kids together in order to not only provide the service effectively, but to be able to afford to provide the service, because we do subsidize to some extent many things that we do. With the loss of permanent staff temporarily and long term, you will see a difference in our park maintenance, landscape and turf maintenance, refuse collection, and restroom servicing. One of the things we did do in response to COVID, in part because we lost hourly staff in parks, we switched our permanent staff to different schedules. So we have permanent staff that are working on the weekend. And as a result of that, we also chose to close certain parks and park restrooms to minimize them being distributed too far and wide across the city. We're hopeful we'll be able to reopen them. But again, restroom servicing is pretty important when you're dealing with a health emergency. And so what we've done instead in high use areas, if you've seen the portable toilets and the hand washing stations all over, we may continue to do more of that just as a way to continue to provide a service, but not require a city staff person to go in and clean a restroom 3 times a day. We do have a vacancy in our street tree crew. It's a senior tree trimmer. Part of our proposal is to keep that position vacant until the beginning of the new fiscal year. That does affect our ability to complete our tree pruning tasks and removals, and also could delay emergency response. Because as senior tree trimmer, we have 2 of those positions and they're pretty important to what we're doing. And then as we look at what's happening in the administration division, the assistant director position's been vacant for more than a year. We recently had our senior capital project supervisor leave the city, and then also the associate planner. So we have 3 vacancies in that division, and so it's down to the director and our project planner and our project tech, which brings us back to probably 2014 in terms of staffing levels, and we're trying to keep things going to the best of our ability. But we will see, we had lots of plans. Ms. Parmalee mentioned the funding in the administration division. We had really hoped to start the long overdue park and recreation needs assessment that we've been talking about for many years. That won't happen in the next year. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we're just talking about the reductions that the city administrator has asked us to identify right now. And as you saw in the earlier part of our presentation, about $3.4 million of the department's revenue comes through recreation programs and services. And if we're unable to rent our facilities, if we're unable to open our facilities for recreation programs, if we're unable to do those things for an extended period of time, we will not receive the revenue for those activities. In some cases, we can reduce expenses because they're directly associated with operating that facility. In other cases, we can't do that. And so depending on how long the crisis continues and depending on the extent to which we have to revise management of our facilities and limit use of our facilities, we will likely need to look at other ways to reduce our expenses that will dig into programs unrelated that the department's engaged in. So that's kind of the operating end of it. And general fund capital, this is a very old photograph. We must replace it because this building is almost reopened, and unfortunately we're waiting for COVID-19 to pass so that we can reopen it. General fund capital is key to the function and effectiveness of this department. Over the last 10 years, we've really strived with the commission support and the city council support to reinvest in many of our park areas, and we've been very successful. And we have a lot of things that we still want to do and a lot of objectives. In looking at just what we need as a department, where it's about $100 million today in today's dollars, and that's a good solid guess. It goes across all of our buildings, our sports facilities. It addresses areas that are high use, that provide the greatest public benefit. We really are looking at situations where the facility condition creates safety and access concerns, so it needs to be addressed. And then we have the community demanding more and diverse recreation opportunities, and it's our objective to try to respond to those to the best of our ability. To that end, I want to highlight some of the things we have achieved, because there's always nice to talk about those as well. So Mackenzie Park, we did finally open the off-leash area in August 2019. We are scheduled, working with the Public Works Facilities Division, to do the restroom renovation in August. That would be funded through Measure C, and that would do full-scale renovation and make the restroom fully accessible, which is what it's needed for some time. Bonnet Park restroom remodel will be done fairly soon. That is a project that's funded through a community development block grant. So it's one step towards revitalizing that park, and we're happy to say that project's almost complete. And then the Chase Palm Park Center, much beloved, and used to be the old police radio shop. It's gone through many lifetimes. It was a project that was identified by our facilities division and Public Works as needing an overhaul. So we've been working very closely with them over the last couple of months to give it an overhaul with funds from fiscal year 20. And as soon as we can open it and as soon as people can populate it, I think people will be very pleased with the modernization of the facility. It's lighter, it's brighter, it'll have air conditioning, new carpet. There's things we still want to do, like renovate the restrooms, but that's probably a little ways away now. And then lastly, our wonderful Cabrillo Pavilion. The photo down on the right gives you a view of what it looks like today. Even though we won't be having large gatherings, we will be signing up individuals and groups to take tours of the facility. We're in the process of doing a video tour, and the idea is, if we can't use it as a group, the department is going to be hosting tours through the facility, following physical distancing guidelines, but really giving people an opportunity to see what's in store whenever we can get there. We have a number of projects that are in design and permitting. The never-ending 1,000 Steps repair is currently in coastal development permitting. The Louise Lowry Davis Center renovation, we're trying to pull the building permit. Bonnet Park, we've been working on for some time. The West Beach Splash Playground, Ortega Park Master Plan, we've been working on this year. In fact, we were just at the Architectural Board of Review, and we got positive comments, so we can go on to the Planning Commission. And then the Dwight Murphy Master Plan we're working on as well. So of those projects, we're hopeful that some portion of them will continue in fiscal year 21 with existing funds. There might be some additional funds that we will secure with council approval from Measure C to move them forward. So our original proposal for next year was to provide $350,000 to the Ortega Park renovation project. We're still proposing that. That would take us through final design, plans, construction drawings, specifications, basically ready to build when we have the building money. We just recently submitted a grant proposal to the state for $1 million to help support that project. And our goal, will still be, no matter what, to build that project in phases. The Louise Lowry Davis Center renovation, asking for $800,000 in Measure C. It's changed a little bit because we did receive a community development block grant toward that project. And then we would be doing exterior improvements only. So it would do 1/3 of the project. Playground replacement is something we've always needed, and those funds will help go to replace the West Side Center playground. And then street tree and median removals. This is something, working with the Public Works Department, we've started on where they are doing streets work, where we have street trees and medians that have not been, may need to be replaced or need further attention or a rethink. funds are being allocated for us to take that on and do that in conjunction with Measure C road related improvements. So that's what we started with, and looking to where we are today. One of the things that will be on the City Council calendar for next Tuesday is a reduction of those capital funds by almost $750,000 as another way to reduce the general fund shortfall in fiscal year 20. So what this means for us is the Bonet Park project will be largely limited to sidewalk improvements that we would do in conjunction with the Creeks Division doing a stormwater improvement project. So we wouldn't have our multi-sport court, we wouldn't have new lighting, we wouldn't have new fencing, we wouldn't have certain improvements that we were designed through that community process. It would not preclude them from happening in the future. West Beach Splash Playground, essentially that is a project that we have just enough money to get through conceptual design, and then it's going to have to sit on a shelf without any further funding for now. Franceschi Park, we have $450,000 allocated. A couple year or so ago, council allocated more money for us to do the redo of the master plan for the entire park. Reduction of funding for this project would mean we would have just enough to get through concept planning for the interpretive pavilion for the house. And the department feels this is really important. We've been promising it to the community for longer than most of us would like to remember. There's been a staff workload issue with the loss of some of our other projects and the scaling of those back. It would be a high priority at the beginning of the year. And then we had some funding left in our municipal tennis center improvements that we had really hoped would go towards our lighting project and the always wanted lighting project, but those are going to be returned to the general fund. The remaining projects, as I mentioned, would be scaled back significantly and focused just on completing a stage in the design or providing a grant match that we've already committed to, or as a result of designated funds from other sources. So it's not something that could return to the general fund. So what does this look like? What we'll be working on next year, hopefully final design for Ortega Park. We hope to be before the commission with the project for your findings by the August meeting and at Planning Commission by September. And that would give us the ability to then get our final design approval and move forward with final design. The grant funds that we've applied for, we need to be able to spend them starting in fiscal year 2022. So this would give us enough time to achieve that. I mentioned earlier the Louise Lowry Davis Center. We submitted a proposal for community development block grants to initiate the first phase of the project, which would be exterior renovations. That was granted and approved by council. With the allocation of Measure C funds, we could move forward with that project this fall. West Side Center Playground, that was also a CDBG priority for us, and we're looking for Measure C matching funds from fiscal year 21 to make that a reality. So we could do one playground next year instead of two. And then lastly, we also received a portion, we asked for $150,000 of community development block grant funds for renovating the East Side Neighborhood Park restroom that wasn't fully funded. So right now we'll be looking for ways in which to close that gap or come up with an alternate project, but we'll be working closely with the community development block grant staff to figure out what our options are there. And that essentially wraps up the general fund presentation and kind of where we are. Happy to take questions, and I will close my blind so I don't have this sunspot on me. Thank you.
Are there questions for Ms. Zachary? Commissioner Longstreet?
Of course, I have questions. I have been keeping track of the city's overall projections for the next year. And I must say, I think they're optimistic at best. We have, what, a $12 million shortfall in this last quarter, and we're only looking at a $9 million shortfall for next year when most of our our heaviest months are the summer months, being a tourist town that we are. That is especially impacts us in Parks and Rec. And the reality is, you know, we've never come back from 2008 or whatever other one we did before there. So I'm really having well, it breaks my heart, first off. But as we look at this and the restructuring of the division, do you anticipate retirements within our division also during this next time? I know that has always been something that's happened, and then will further impact the other staff. You know, I mean, we're going to go into a time when we don't get to replace anybody, and I'm looking at how thin our staff is going to be stretched.
Chair Clark, Commissioner Longstreet, one of the reasons why we have so many vacancies, we've had a revolving door of retirements and people finding other career opportunities for the last 5 years at a rate I never anticipated would occur. There may be some additional retirements, and if that does occur, I think as we did during the last economic downturn, we would be looking at the extent to which we stopped doing more activities, with the extent to which we could move people into different positions. It's all very variable, but if more people leave the organization, certainly one of the first considerations would be, is that a position we can repurpose, or do we need? And this department, Parks and Recreation, I can say this to the commission because it's been said elsewhere, we are always looking at how we reorganize and refocus and re-strategize and reallocate the resources that we have, because we're always short on resources.
And I in recreation, the program doesn't happen, the costs aren't there, the staff, you know, you still have your basic staff that has to be there. But in parks, they don't go away. They still need to be cleaned. They still need to be maintained. And so that is a big concern. And that would be something I really would emphasize to council, is that those reductions have happened. We are at base level. As I don't think we've ever come back staff-wise. Our hourlies have gone up. And if we don't have those hourlies replaced full-time positions. And so here we are, you know, how do we cut that back? The other concern I have on the recreation side is the programs that we provide that keep kids off the street, the after-school programs. Those are going to be needed 100-fold more when kids go back to school, because parents aren't going to have money to send their kids to Girls Inc. I mean, the impacts of this are going to go out in waves. So I understand we can't finance it, you know, but I think we're going to have to be looking at partnerships and how can we help? Who do we work with in these times? And I know the staff is creative at that, but we're all scrambling at this point. But as it starts to pull back together, I really do have concerns about our youth programming that happens over at the Franklin Center, over and above any of our capital. I know we need to keep moving forward with capital, but I think in the next year or two, it's going to be about the people. Yes, there's no senior program. Seniors should not be out in programs. We get that. But what happens if our staff gets so thin that we can't support the food bank programs, or the things that the communities come to really need from us right now? So those are my main concerns. Question is, with the allocated costs, if everything we do is going to be reduced by 5%, do our allocated costs go down 5%? You know, and that's, we used to have more of an ability to control those costs, and we don't any longer. So that's.
So Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, if I could just jump in, because this sort of gives you a little bit more information. The programs that we provide in partnership with nonprofits at our centers, they are high priorities for this department, and through COVID and for the foreseeable future, they always will be, because we can do them in partnership with others. And I have to say, volunteers are critical to a lot of those as well. But I would also say that, you know, we had staff that never were part of a food distribution day that learned how to do it and helped make it happen, because we didn't have staff, hourly staff, to support the permanent staff anymore. So we've had youth activities staff be part of food distribution, you know, staff at career recreation go over and do that. And we're going to continue to do that. With a facility closed, it's a little easier. So part of what we're trying to do is like, well, if it's not open, then what do we do? If it's open, then what do we do? And certainly, who do we look to help us implement a program, because we won't have the resources to do that. Our concern as far as youth programs go, and really we're waiting to hear what the school district is going to do, is depending on the extent to which kids are back in school and when they're in school, that will dictate how we might be able to respond. It doesn't mean it would go away entirely, it just might look a little different. So we're very cognizant of that. When it comes to allocated costs, if I could just say one more thing, allocated costs represent 25%, 20 to 25% of the general fund allocation. So it's about 3.4 million of the 12 million we get from the general fund. So you're correct in that that's an area where we often have little influence. We are sending computers back that we think will save us $28,000 or $22,000. We are looking carefully and talking with Public Works facilities staff about where we won't need custodial because the building won't be open or it won't be used. We do supplement those services when we have rentals. We've combed through our motor pool and looked at ways not to spend money there, but that doesn't really affect our operating budget. So we are trying to find ways to cut those costs where we're not going to need them, but it's not something that we can just do.
No, I understand that, and that's a concern to me, is that so much of those costs we don't control. And my concern is with our staff. I think everybody will pitch in, and I think they do a great job. I don't want them so thin that they don't feel like they're doing a good job. Do you know? And this is what's happened to us in the past, is parks, and you know, if we lose all those hourlies, for how long? What do we get back? And we never come back up. So that's my concern to take forward to council. I also would like to say that as we move through this, every month is going to be different. We're going to know more, the money's going to be different. I would like us to be there for you to bounce it off of, because when cuts are made, people are going to come to the commission, they're going to go to council. I think it's best to run it by us first and so we're on the front line with you as far as public comment and public support, so that we move forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair McGill.
Well, a lot of what I was thinking and of saying, I've just heard Commissioner Longstreet talk about. I guess with allocated costs, in my experience with allocated costs, is we get into these really dire situations, and sometimes the allocated costs go up, because which is extremely painful, but it means a lot of times that not everyone's really taking the hard decisions when they can push the per capita cost out. And that's a big conversation to have across the city, and to be mindful of in the department, because there's really nothing more annoying. The thing that really struck me when I read this was I was just gobsmacked when I saw 5%. And I was really disheartened and almost scared when I saw the impacts of just 5%, because it's almost hard for me to believe that it's only going to be 5%. I'm struggling to get my hands around that, given everything that's happening in the community. So I guess my concern question, this is not necessarily feedback for the council, but is to think, well, what happens if it's 10%? What happens if it's you get nothing but the revenues you generate? I mean, what is the doomsday scenario? And if that comes to pass, what is sacrosanct? What is most important to maintain? Is it youth services? What is it? And can that be clearly articulated? Because if that can be clearly articulated, then the pain of the cuts that might be asked for as we go down the road could be easier to describe and discuss. And I concur with Commissioner Longstreet that it would be great to be kept in the loop to bounce things off of as we go forward, because I don't know, I just kind of have a feeling this is going to get worse than we think. And that's it. Most of it's already been said.
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, if I could just give you, we're cognizant of that, and that's something that if we were to present every scenario that we've been thinking about, it would be really difficult to do. So the recommendations that we have, we believe will take us one step into reducing expenses, that some of which we won't incur anyway, or some of which we just don't know how it'll play out. And then we do have a sense of, if we don't have revenue that comes in the first quarter, what happens then? And until we know more, it would be difficult to try to articulate that to you. But I can tell you that I've been working very closely with division managers, and we've overturned every stone we can find in the department to evaluate. And when the time comes, we'll be able to share that with you and get your feedback and thoughts to help us.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, at some point it gets to sort of the guiding, there will be in your heart and in your head somewhere that says, no matter what else happens, we cannot cut this. You know, we might be able to cut off 2 arms and a leg, but we cannot cut this. And it's good to understand as a department what those bottom lines are for you.
Back in 2008, 9, 10, 11, it was clean, green, and safe, and the focus was on our parks. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts, you know, we're supposed to be giving you a recommendation or letting you know how we feel about the expenditure reductions when you go to City Council next week. And as a nurse who takes care of elderly people, and as a parent of a teenager who's been privy to his life and the lives of all his peers over the last 2 months, I can just tell you that our parks and our open spaces and our beaches right now are essential. Like with my kids and with them being out of school, the places they've gone to our parks and they've gone to our beaches. And hopefully they're social distancing. They've all been lectured about it, but with that, that's providing them a sense of reality. It's keeping them grounded. It's their normal in this new norm, being able to return to these places that they've grown up visiting. So with reductions, I think it's really important to remember that for the health and mental well-being of our community, we need to have our parks and open spaces, and that is essential. You can reduce park maintenance, but keep it, like you said, clean, green, and safe. We have to have places to go, or we're going to see tragedy. I mean, I've seen bad stuff already in the last 2 months. So just cut what you have to, but keep what you can to keep our kids with a place to go. That's all. I feel like everything else is so unknown. It's hard to give any clear directive, but those are my thoughts. And anyone else? Commissioner Longstreet.
Can you, I assume as we're making a recommendation on the budget moving forward, and I really feel the proposed budget, all the work you put into it is for naught. It gives you a starting point, but I would say that we would accept that. But if you could put up the slides of the cuts for what the positions you're keeping open and the different reductions you had, because I think that's what we're moving forward to council and saying we support these. And that, you know, that I understand there will be more, but that we are, as a commission, prepared to work with staff to maintain our Parks and Recreation Department to the best of the ability that we can. You know, that what I would want to say to council is that our parks, clean, green, and safe, worked in 2008, and it is where we will be again. Oh, look, there were a lot of slides of reductions. So we're looking at permanent staff reductions, hourly. As we look at hourly reductions, I would want to say that wherever possible for the maintenance and safety in our parks, we add hourly wherever feasible. And that we look to staff to tell us when safety is at risk. Reduction of supplies and services, of course, reductions of allocated costs. You know, I would support all of those. If you go to the next one.
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, maybe a little bit of context would be also helpful for you, a little bit more context. The reduction for parks represents about 25% of the hourly budget for parks. The reduction for recreation represents about 14% of the hourly of recreation. And then the reduction of hourly staff for admin is basically 100%. And then the staff reductions, the city administrator implemented a hiring freeze a couple of months ago. So our goal here is to look strategically at positions that we can hold vacant because we're expecting business to be lower, for example, or we can have staff work half-time in one facility and half-time in another facility. That leads to the next slide. And then some of them, the delay is we're hoping in January 2021, we'll be able to start renting facilities more, or we need to bring people back on. I can tell you, you know, of these, so that's kind of the strategy, if it gives you a sense. So one position to be held vacant throughout the year is the associate planner position, for example. Another one is an administrative position. That's the strategy we've taken. When you look at this next slide, this is the impact of some of those reductions. And so by looking at where we expect to have less business that maybe that's okay, it's okay, quote unquote okay. Under the circumstances, this is the step we would take. Any step that we take that we subsequently find is impossible to implement or the conditions change, we would always be open to looking at, okay, how do we do something different? You mentioned earlier, what if we have another person leave the department? Depending on that position, that could shift where we obtain savings. We could forego something that we don't have the ability to forego right now, but we would move that around. And that's why you see a lot of changes with the operating hours. It's both so that we're not spreading our permanent staff too thin, they can work on their programs, but that we don't have the hourly staff. And then when you go to here, the first bullet, it's heartfelt related to summer fun, but we don't think we can provide it. We subsidize it about $135,000, $140,000 that we don't have anymore. But that doesn't mean it's not going to come back next year, and it doesn't mean that we're not going to try to do something this summer. We're trying to stay nimble. It's not the summer fun we had last year. It could be something new.
No, and I understand that. And that to me is you have hourlies who don't have a program to run. You know, that's sort of the basics. And I don't believe we're going to be to those kind of activities this summer. I don't think we're, as a state, going to be released to them. I guess what I'm just trying to get across is that as needed, as we go forward, and I get that there's a hiring freeze, that if it becomes apparent that we have parks that we're not able to take care of, that the council look towards some hourly replacement hours, especially in parks. Recreation, if you don't have the people, you don't need the staff. In parks, you need the staff no matter what. The trees continue to be there. The grass needs to be mowed. So that's what I want to convey. But as I go through the service level impacts, they break my heart, but I support the thoughtfulness that has gone with these reductions. I don't see another way out of them. So I just want to make sure that we emphasize that the community needs our parks, and that there be some consideration in budgeting that, let's say we open the skate park. It's going to need monitoring. Where do you find that money to monitor a skate park that should be open for the use of those kids, but we can't afford to monitor it to the safety that it should be? So that's the flexibility I want council to consider as they're looking at the budget.
Chair Clark, would you like me to move on to the Creeks Fund, or what would you like now?
As long as nobody else has any more comments, I think. Yes, okay.
And I apologize, I don't know how to advance these slides. There we go, that's better. There we go, Creeks Fund. Switching gears, it's kind of, it's like old times in a way for me. But I'd like to talk about the Creeks Fund. We're going to take the same approach as we did with the general fund in terms of talking about what it is, where the money comes from, why we have it. We're fortunate that the voters passed Measure B in 2000. That was 20 years ago. If you think about it, 20 years ago this November. Created a special fund with various restricted uses related to improving the quality of stormwaters and other surface waters, and to carry out creek restoration improvements. In 2001, the Creeks Division was formally established and placed in the Parks and Recreation Department. So when we look at the Creeks Fund by revenue, as I mentioned, TOT bed tax is the primary source of revenue. The recommended budget prior COVID was just over $4 million from Measure B, and then interest of just over $250,000. That's interest on the cash on hand. And then some miscellaneous revenue that we get from our partner agencies for the community outreach work that we do, for a total revenue budget of just over $4.3 million. When we look at expenses by category, looking at fiscal year 21, there's some change, slight change in salaries and benefits, largely related to similar things in the general fund, changes in salaries and the cost of benefits. Some slight increase in allocated costs, a few decreases in supplies and services and special projects, really just related to moving money out of an account that's no longer needed. And then street sweeping shows a slight increase of 12%, an increase of 12%, which is 23,800, which is to support the city's residential street sweeping program. Originally, the proposal to transfer of the revenues to capital was $1.825 million for a total budget of $4.7 million. So going back to the prior slide, you can see there's a revenue of 4.3, yet an expenditure budget of 4.7. So that meant, as we have in prior years, that funds from reserves would make up the difference between the revenue received and the expenditures. And that's largely because there's a huge focus on investing in capital programs, and that's been a priority of the Creeks Division for many years. When you look at what the Creeks Division does and how those expenses are organized by program area, the large amount, the most significant amount, is related to water quality, whether it's water quality research, water quality monitoring, stormwater treatment, creek cleanups, any number of activities, and also capital projects are invested to improve our surface water qualities and creek and surface water quality at the beach. Community outreach and creek restoration, largely half and half, both, and that really addresses both the staffing and the allocation of staff, but also the care of the restored areas. The Creeks Division maintains the habitat restoration sites that have been implemented throughout Santa Barbara City Parks. So that's one thing that we benefit from as a department in terms of augmenting the resources of our Parks Division. And then also in those costs include capital costs that we have. So capital is a big deal, and this gives you a sense of the range of projects that were proposed for funding in fiscal year 21. Many of these are ongoing and involve refunding things like stormwater treatment, supporting next steps in open space restoration, such as at Arroyo Burro. We have a new site, the Arroyo Burro restoration at Palermo Drive. That's a property that was recently acquired. Work has been underway in Honda Valley and doing some restoration to the habitat there. Very low level work, doesn't require major earth moving or that kind of thing, but investing in really looking at opportunities to remove invasives and plant natives. And then some other projects that we place placeholder money for because we anticipate a project in the future. I would point out, third from bottom is the Andre Clark Bird Refuge, which is a high priority project that the Creeks Division is working on and would continue in the next year. And then briefly, we like to talk about grant funding for creeks, and this gives you a sense of where it's been over the last 7 years. In fiscal year 20, the Creeks Division secured grants toward the acquisition of the Palermo property. So that's a key property that we acquired and solicited and secured grants for that. So that gives you a sense of what was achieved in fiscal year 20. And then performance measures, a lot of these are very project-based, unlike performance measures you might see in recreation or parks, which are more service-oriented and program-based versus project-based. And it gives you a sense of a key focus on capital projects and moving things forward. But at the bottom, it shows you what's done related to water quality and water quality research and management, and really understanding what's going on in our creeks and in the ocean at our beaches. So budgetary impacts for the Creeks Fund, different from the general fund. certainly different from our departmental revenues, except this is their departmental revenue. In fiscal year 20, as a result of COVID-19, essentially all visitation to hotels practically came to a standstill. Our heart goes out to the hotel industry and the restaurant industry and everybody who's really suffering across the board. And then, of course, people that are trying to keep us all healthy and keep that going. But the projection is that about $1 million won't be received in Measure B revenue for fiscal year 20. And that looking at the budget expenditures for this year, by reducing some expenditures, we actually end up just being short about $500,000. We're going to close that gap for fiscal year 20, and I would just bring back up in the general fund, we're actually going to give money back to the general fund because of all the vacancies. In this case, the Creeks Division doesn't get any general fund revenue, so it needs to figure out how it's going to make up its shortfall. And so the key priority will be eliminating some capital dollars in order to do that. There is one project for the Elistero restoration area that we don't anticipate would move forward. So the plan is to liquidate that account at 1.57 million. And that not only will take care of the shortfall in fiscal year 20, but will take care of the projected shortfall in fiscal year 21. So looking at 21, the finance department is projecting a decrease in Measure B revenue by just over 600,000. And so the first step that the department's taking is to reduce capital transfer by 925,000. That's more than what shows as far as the revenue is concerned, but it also decreases our use of reserves. All of the projects that were postponed for extra funding, most projects will be postponed for extra funding, except the key priority areas, which is the Arroyoboro open space. Right now, the Creeks Division staff are working on phase 2 of that project, which includes the pedestrian bridge that would connect people from Las Positas into the park, and additional restoration in the area. The Andre Clark Bird Refuge, it's currently in design and they're about to submit for permits, moving that project forward. And then again, with the recently acquired Palermo open space, Creeks Division staff are working on a restoration plan to move forward with in the next year. Otherwise, the Creeks Division is going to maintain most of its operating budget appropriations as proposed. And that concludes a very brief Creeks Fund presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Zachary. Are there any questions for Ms. Zachary? No? Okay. Are we moving on to golf then?
Yes, Chair Clark and Commissioners, I'll have Nicole Parmalee jump in and finish off today's presentation for you.
Thank you, Ms. Zachary. And as we've done with General Fund and Creeks, I will present the budget as initially proposed and then review some of the associated impacts due to COVID-19. Next slide, please. So we always like to start off just with a quick overview. As a reminder, the Golf Fund is an enterprise fund, meaning it receives no general fund support, and so it is fully self-sufficient. And the mission of Santa Barbara Golf Club is that we are dedicated to providing residents and visitors an exceptional and affordable golfing experience in a friendly, inclusive environment for socializing and enjoying nature. Of course, that is at an appropriate social distance as of this year. Next slide, please. Here you can see a breakdown of where the golf course derives its revenues. The largest component, greens fees, makes up about 58% of the total revenue received at the golf course. And these are simply just the fees that golfers pay to play on the course itself. And then next is cart fees, which is a more discretionary expense for those golfers who choose to rent a cart. And this makes up about 17% of the revenues. And together, these two areas comprise 3/4 of the total revenue generated. Other revenue streams include selling merchandise, use of the driving range, practice lessons, restaurant concessions, which is the rent that the city receives from Mulligan's Cafe, and tournament and banquet sales of food and beverages. And then on the right-hand side, the line chart shows how greens fees, which is, again, the largest piece of the revenue pie, have changed over the past decade. And so overall, we've seen modest growth since 2010. So it's, there would be a positive trend line, albeit with some down years here and there. But overall, rounds are holding steady and even growing in most years, and this is the trend that we expect to continue. Next slide, please. Looking at golf revenues by category, the largest component is golf operations, which is just simply all of the revenues derived from the contract with Courseco, the management company. And in this category, we're projecting a 4.5% growth from where at mid-year we anticipated ending the current fiscal year. And also, concession revenue from Mulligan's Cafe is proposed at 1% growth, and you'll see also a bit of a projected decrease in the city's investment portfolio, which leads to the decline in interest income that you see there on the slide. So overall, the recommended revenue budget for fiscal year 21 is just under $3 million, which is a 4.3% increase from FY20 projections. Next slide, please. So we have a few proposed fee changes for the upcoming year. First of all, in fiscal year 21 and moving forward, we are proposing moving all fee increases to start in July to align with the beginning of the fiscal year and to streamline the fee schedule in line with other department and city operations. Previously, the fee increases were done on a calendar year basis and were implemented in January to coincide with some other local courses. But in consultation with Courseco, we do not foresee any issue with moving the increases to July. This is anticipated to capture an additional approximately $16,000 in revenues in the first 6 months of the coming year, which will be particularly helpful as the course is rebounding from the 5-week closure due to COVID-19 this fiscal year. And then the one exception to this will be the programming fees for junior golf instruction and camps, which will still be charged in January to align with the start of the camp season. So overall, we have very minimal proposed fee changes for this year, and they're all included here on the screen. We have the standard $1 increase on greens fees, as well as driving range increases of 50 cents on the medium bucket and $1 on the large bucket. And then in January, Russ Morrison Junior Golf Program fees are proposed to increase from $85 for either the spring or fall session to $90, and for the full year program from $140 to $150, which is still an excellent value for approximately 51 hours of instruction for the full year, which equates to less than $3 an hour if you do the math. Similarly, junior golf camps are proposed to increase from $160 to $170, which is a 5-day camp. And overall, most fees will stay the same, and we don't anticipate any impact on play from these changes, as greens fees and programming are still a great value when compared with the local competition. Next slide, please. So looking at a breakdown of expenses by category, we have standard minimal increases in salaries and benefits, as well as supplies and services. In allocated costs, you'll see a larger percentage increase from some new information technology related costs due to the city's addition of a website content management system that will be coming soon, hopefully in the next fiscal year, as well as network infrastructure charges that are allocated out to each fund across the city. So that's what that is a result of. The transfer to capital is recommended to decrease somewhat due to prior year capital funds that were anticipated to carry over into fiscal year 21 to augment the new capital funding designated for capital improvements in the coming year. And overall, the fiscal year 21 expenditure budget is almost 2.9 million. Next slide, please. And looking at how the proposed budget impacts reserves, as of FY19, the golf fund had a closing balance of, or the reserve fund had a closing balance of $220,000. As of mid-year this year, we projected to end the year with additions to reserves that would result in a fund balance of $353,000. And the proposed budget in 21 would add another 149,000 to reserves, which would result in a projected reserve balance of just over 500,000 at the end of fiscal year 21, which would, making progress towards meeting the reserve policy level for the Golf Fund, which is approximately $900,000, while still allocating needed funds for capital investments to maintain the course to a high quality standard. Next slide, please. And here is the originally proposed capital budget for fiscal year 21. As you may recall, the Players Improvement Fund allocates $1 from every paid round of golf to support projects that are identified from the Player Course Improvements Subcommittee and supported by the Golf Advisory Committee. And then you can see here some of the other projects that were planned for the upcoming year, one of which a big priority in terms of course improvements was the renovation of 11 bunkers, for which FY21 capital funding was to be supplemented with the carryover capital funds to complete these renovations. And then additionally, other identified projects were renovating the number 10 tee box, making needed improvements to an on-course restroom, the pro shop, rental club replacements, and upgrading key maintenance equipment for a total of just over $200,000. Next slide, please. Finally, taking a look at performance measures, there are no substantive changes in fiscal year 21. We've simply adjusted some of the annual targets to reflect performance trends, and our focus continues to be on growing greens and cart fee revenues, managing our water use, excelling in customer service, and attracting and retaining preferred cardholders. Next slide, please. So now that we've laid out the initial framework, we'll take a look at some of the impacts to the Golf Fund in response to COVID-19. Next slide. So as a brief update of impacts to the current fiscal year, following the governor's stay-at-home order and the closure of all non-essential businesses, the golf course did close from March 20th to April 25th, at which point we received the go-ahead to reopen while following strict social distancing and other sanitization protocols. Mulligan's Cafe was also closed for a similar time frame, but has also since reopened and is serving takeout only in accordance with health order guidance. I should also add that since we reopened, business has been booming and volume of rounds is higher than ever before, which has been really helpful in offsetting some of the other revenue streams that unfortunately are not being captured at this time, which includes merchandise sales since the pro shop is still currently closed, and reduced driving range and instruction revenues. During the 5-week closure, the course lost an estimated $300,000 in revenues, which was partially offset by operational savings during the closure. However, many of our costs are fixed and they don't go away, unfortunately, when the course is not operational. We did, however, reduce staffing to the minimum required to operate and maintain the course during the closure. And then to further offset revenue losses, we discontinued capital transfers out of $190,000, a good portion of which was planned to carry over into the following fiscal year to support bunker renovations, like I mentioned earlier. So due to these adjustments and with the course's reopening, we do still anticipate ending the year with a positive fund balance, which is great news that we would not be experiencing if the course closure had become more protracted as we initially speculated it might. Next slide, please. And finally, looking at the outlook for next fiscal year, we are cautiously optimistic. And unless COVID conditions worsen and the course is forced to close again for some reason, we don't really anticipate any significant impact to revenues from golf operations next fiscal year. And on an exciting note, we just last week received $197,000 in funding from the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program, which you may be familiar with. This is a business loan that was created in response to COVID-19 to help businesses cover certain eligible expenses, including payroll and utilities. And this loan can and hopefully will ultimately be forgiven at the end of the designated 8-week period, which would provide a significant and greatly beneficial windfall to the Golf Fund. And so based on our analysis in conjunction and discussions with CourseCo and everything that I've outlined, the department is recommending that we maintain budget appropriations as originally proposed for the Golf Fund in fiscal year 21, with the caveat that we will hold off on any capital expenditures until when and if economic conditions become such that we feel comfortable making those type of expenditures. So this would provide a $200,000 buffer to absorb any future potential revenue losses. So that's all I have for golf, and can turn it back over to Ms. Zachary to conclude unless there are any questions.
Are there any questions? No? Okay, thank you for that.
Chair Clark and Commissioners, the standard end slide, we've been talking about it for some time during this meeting. Thank you for your time. We are seeking a recommendation from the Commission. If you would rather give us your comments and concerns and considerations as it relates to the changing condition for the department, we will note those and they will be part of our council presentation. I would also add that I anticipate with the agenda coming out in the next couple of days, we'll know potentially when we'll be on the agenda on Tuesday. It is part of the regular meeting, and we will be sure to share with you the PowerPoint presentation that we will be providing to the City Council.
Thank you. So in the past, we've gone department, oh, Commissioner Longstreet.
I did have one question on the fees. And that was the tree removal fee. That was a big jump. Would that be better done over a 2-year period? You know, it just seems going from 50 to 75 is large.
Chair Clark and Commissioner Longstreet, we went back and forth on that, to be honest. We probably should have been a little bit more aware of the fee, need to increase the fee slightly. Looking at, and I apologize, I don't have the data in front of me, but we did have Mr. Slack go and do an assessment of how much time is spent, and it probably covers less than 10% of the cost. We certainly can revisit the fee. One of the things that one of our considerations moving forward are, even though there's a recommendation to increase a fee, that doesn't preclude the department from reducing it. So if we see things changing and we want to encourage use or concerns, we could also reduce it.
Yeah, I know we've always gone for smaller increases more regularly, you know, because in the old days we didn't increase for a long time, and then you'd get slammed with one of these and everybody comes apart. And I can't imagine, let's say $15 a permit is going to make any difference one way or another if we were to divide it up over a couple of years. So
okay,
that would be one thought I had.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had questioned that too, but when I try to do the math in my head on how many hours city staff spends on each tree, it made a little bit more sense to me. I was guessing Nathan probably spends at least 10 hours on every street tree removal request, with him visiting and then posting and then it coming to stack and then working. He often works with the homeowner trying to find a solution before it even comes to stack. So I thought it a large jump, but reasonable in value.
Oh, and I don't dispute it. I don't think we're recouping any of the money that it really costs. I just think that it's more of an optic than a reality of money. So
thank you. Commissioner McGill?
Yeah, I mean, the words optic was about to come out of my mouth. It's really not so much a question of the money itself, given the time spent, but it's, you know, Santa Barbara doesn't have a reputation for being low cost or easy to permit things. And if it can be spread out over a couple of years, I think it will do more good than harm overall.
Thank you. The one that surprised me and Ms. Parmalee addressed during her presentation was the large percentage of daily permit pickleball fee. I thought that might ruffle some feathers, but then she did point out it only came out to, I think it was $2. So I'm glad she proactively pointed that out. Okay. So in the past, we've made recommendations to approve the budget division by division. I don't know if people want to do that today or if they want to make their comments and recommend approval of the entire budget in a chunk. Does anybody have any opinions on that? Commissioner McGill?
I'm struggling with the buttons. Personally, given the amount of sheer volume of work and rework that's needed to be done and thought that's gone into this and the level of uncertainty going forward, I would be prepared to say that we support the recommendations as a whole, you know, including the work that's been done to address the reductions to date. I think given the amount of uncertainty, doing it piece by piece probably isn't necessary.
Okay. I was wondering if, I know this has been a really long meeting, so maybe we could do it in a couple sentences each or less, but I was wondering if we could go commissioner by commissioner and say what you felt was really important in protecting throughout this cutting. For instance, you know, BB is concerned about hourly reductions and not getting those back and not being able to support youth programs when our restrictions are lifted. I would also say that I'm very concerned about decreasing maintenance to our parks and open spaces at a time when they might be used more and are needed more than ever. Did anybody else want to make us, you know, specifically say what they are concerned about in a couple sentences or less? No. Commissioner Lesner-Buxton?
Yes, thank you. I'm concerned about youth services, particularly internship program is in the Eastside fraction and the youth council.
Okay.
And I'm also concerned about closure of the Davis Center without staff. So I work at Redwood Center and I know I often consult with staff at the Davis Center when we have vulnerable people coming into their office.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Lesner-Buxton. Anybody else? Okay.
Chair Clark, could I ask Commissioner Lesner-Buxton a question? I just want a clarification on your comment. Is it the Davis Center or are you concerned about the West Side Center? Because
the
know
biggest center we could get often where people show up for to get help and then we get called and we often have a good relationship with the staff.
Okay, well, I'll look into that and see what our options are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Navarez?
Chair Clark, I just wanted to let you know that Councilmember Snedden is listening to the commission meeting, and she would like me to let you all know that she is listening to this discussion.
Thank you. We thank Councilmember Snedden for being here. That being said, is there anything else people want to add about what they feel is really important to our community right now? I mean, I think that the department's done an amazing job in keeping their priorities straight and trying to keep our spaces and programming open to the extent possible. I just would like to remind our commissioners and our council member that the Parks Department is not optional. It is essential to the health and well-being of our community and our youth and our elders. And we do have to make cuts and we have to be smart, but we've got to be smart about it. We can't let our parks and maintenance decline to a point where we're not going to get them back. And like BB said, we can't let our staff go to the extent that we're not going to get them back after this. But I commend Ms. Zachary for all the work that's gone into this. I think this is a really thoughtful way to go about stabbing in the dark. I mean, you're trying to address the unknowable, and you've done it intelligently and with experience, and thank you for that. I mean, you really are trying to address a future that you don't know what it's going to look like, and I can't imagine what that's been like for you. So, Commissioner Longstreet?
Are we ready for a motion?
I believe we are.
I would make a recommendation that we accept, or make a motion that we accept the budget as presented today and the recommendations for the cuts, for the reductions in service impacts to be implemented due to COVID-19. We recommend approval of the proposed FY21 Golf Fund, Creeks Fund, and General Fund operating and capital budgets, including the proposed fees, charges schedules, and that the commission will be actively looking at working with the staff to address this this pandemic.
Commissioner Martinez-Cohen?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
Just that I'm sure that Ms. Zachary will be forwarding our comments. I know that Councilperson Snedden has heard them, but our concerns over serving our families, maintaining our parks and our open spaces, and looking to the future generations with our capital programs and things.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? So moved. Thank you. And we skipped we didn't make any comments about Creeks. I wanted to thank the Creeks division for the presentation and the work and the thought they put behind that too. So thank you. All right, well, I know that wasn't a very long meeting. We could just socialize for a while if you guys want, or we could adjourn. Adjourn? Okay.
I
Okay.
have a question.
Yes, Commissioner Lesnar Buxton.
When is our next meeting?
Oh, I think I saw it here, June 21st, June, let me look.
Chair Clark, it's
Yeah.
the next regularly scheduled meeting would be Wednesday, June 24th at 4 p.m.
Great.
Thank you.
And I'm assuming we're going to do it in this format?
Currently, yes, we anticipate that will be the case.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner McGill?
It's already been done, but I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Rose Navarez for making this go just about as seamlessly and flawlessly as we could have hoped for. So thanks, Rose.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Rose. Okay, with that, we're adjourned. Oh, wait, there's Rose.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Thank
Signing
you.
out.
Thank
Wash
you.
your hands. Be safe.
All right.